Right. Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning and welcome to this hearing of the House Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing and Trade. Today, stubbornly high unemployment continues to have a chokehold on the American economy. In the months ahead, our subcommittee will be taking a close look at some of the impediments to progress and the keys to a more prosperous America. And the chair will now recognize herself for an opening statement and officially come to order. We have a unique opportunity to make Made in America matter again. If we as a Congress and as a nation are truly serious about creating the kind of positive legislative and regulatory environment needed to create new jobs, as well as to bring back jobs to the United States from abroad, there are some common sense steps that we should take right now. As chairman of this subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over interstate and foreign commerce, I'm hoping to make job creation one of our top priorities. After a record 20 straight months of unemployment above 9%, it's time to finally free American innovation and ingenuity, long held hostage by a regulatory regime which is as great a threat to our prosperity as is any foreign regime. Today, U.S. businesses are holding tight onto more than $1.8 trillion in cash reserves. Let's give them a reason to invest that money in America's future. Here are some of the things we should do immediately. First, let's ensure regulatory fairness. Rules and regulations imposed by Washington cost Americans more than $1.75 trillion each year, or about $15,500 per household. Moving forward, we should complete a top-to-bottom review of all regulations, scrubbing every outdated and senseless regulatory requirement off the books. Next, place a moratorium on any job-killing regulations and establish a more fair and transparent review process. And finally, require congressional approval for all major rules and regulations imposing significant new costs on the economy. Second, we need to make intellectual property protection a top priority. By most estimates, the theft of U.S. intellectual property costs our economy hundreds of billions of dollars a year, but the real damage, both in terms of lost jobs and stalled progress, is impossible to calculate. Most sinister, this is deflating to our nation's entrepreneurial spirit and psyche. Simply put, our nation's economy cannot thrive in a world of no-cost competitors. Third, let's incentivize and reward innovation. According to a recent report by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, the United States ranked 6th among 40 nations in innovation-based competitiveness, but we were dead last in progress made over the past decade, dead last. There are smart ways to use the U.S. tax code and patent laws to reward companies that create new jobs and keep those jobs here in America. Fourth, we need to open more foreign markets to U.S. products. We simply cannot sit on the sidelines while other nations sign free trade agreements and gain a foothold in promising new markets. Long-stalled trade promotion agreements with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama should move forward quickly. Years of lost opportunities have only resulted in thousands of lost jobs. It's time to quit playing politics with our trade policies. Fifth, we should embrace vigorous oversight of new laws and agencies. Aggressive oversight doesn't have to be a political parlor game. Rather, we should see these as beneficial opportunities to get it right. Americans want and deserve our best efforts. Oversight hearings, which this subcommittee will be holding this year, are a unique opportunity to see what's working and what's not. And at the end of the day, we must have the political courage to embrace change that's not always popular, but necessary. Finally, let's make insourcing in vogue. Frankly, I am tired of hearing people say, the jobs are gone and they're not coming back. Outsourcing is not a one-way street. By providing a stable and predictable regulatory framework, by protecting intellectual property, by incentivizing and rewarding innovation, and by opening more foreign markets to our products, we can not only end the exodus of jobs overseas, but also begin the process of bringing some of those jobs back home to America. In fact, it has already started. GE, General Motors, Ford, Boeing, Delta Airlines, Master Lock, and Caterpillar are just a few of the companies that are embracing insourcing. They should be applauded and other U.S. companies encouraged to follow suit. During the course of this entire week, ABC News has been taking an in-depth look at how buying Made in America can translate into millions of new jobs across the United States. Today, we are at an important crossroads in our nation's history. The way forward is clear. Creating new jobs and preserving existing jobs here at home should be our top priority. It will strengthen our economy, reduce the deficit, enhance U.S. competitiveness, and restore pride in Made in America. For this subcommittee, there can be no greater legacy. And now I'd like to yield back my time and recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, the ranking member, Mr. Butterfield, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much for convening this very important hearing today. And let me just say that this conversation is certainly very timely. Helping unemployed Americans get back to work must be our agenda, both Democrat and Republican. Millions of Americans are out of work through no fault of their own. They are unable to pay their bills, much less save for retirement or their children's education. Some Americans are even forced to choose between feeding themselves or taking the medicines they deserve. This is unacceptable. Given the state of the economy, we must leave no stone unturned in our search for policies that can promote hiring and bring jobs to those who need them. The Recovery Act was a good first step. Some have questioned the wisdom of this investment. The country's most respected economists, however, agree that there would have been significantly slower growth and higher unemployment if this investment had not been made. It is working. It is working in my district, and I pray that it is working in your district. You will hear me say repeatedly while we serve together that I represent the fourth poorest district in America. It is mostly a rural area in eastern North Carolina. Many of my constituents who are lucky enough to have a computer and internet connection at home use dial-up service, and because of relatively low population density, there's little incentive for companies to build the necessary middle-mile infrastructure to reach these areas. In this day and age, how is someone in a rural area supposed to start or grow a successful business or learn high-tech skills in school without access to broadband internet? The NTIA fortunately saw the need that existed and awarded 2 stimulus grants for broadband infrastructure that will bring high-speed internet capacity to tens of thousands of my unserved and underserved communities. The economy is now beginning to create more jobs each month than it sheds, and certain parts of the economy have returned to profitability. But this upturn has not resulted in America's companies investing in new hires. I suppose they're waiting for market certainty and congressional certainty. While they wait, too many Americans are still suffering. It is time for us to take the second step. The federal government must engage, not through another stimulus, but through targeted strategic investments like rural North Carolina's broadband grants that have the potential to create jobs in the short term, support long-term national priorities, and provide a competitive business climate for the successful industries of the future. Investments in 3 particular areas stand out as building blocks. In research and development is certainly where we begin, infrastructure and education, especially STEM education. I am fully committed to getting our fiscal house in order. I think we all are, and I believe the President has made clear that he is as well. But reducing the deficit will come only through a serious look at the government's long-term obligations, not through rapid across-the-board cuts. It is not inconsistent to make tough choices about necessary cuts at the same time that we identify critical strategic investments in our country's future. And so I look forward to a robust discussion and receiving the testimony of the Assistant Secretary, whom we welcome today, and the witnesses on the second panel. The fact remains, and it's very clear, we must create the opportunity for business and industry to create 7 million jobs to get the economy back where it was before the recession. It will take innovative approaches to get there. We will not get there if we continue to be mired in partisan brinksmanship. The American people are demanding, bipartisan solutions to these complex American problems. And that's why I congratulate the chairman for convening this hearing today. I welcome all of the witnesses, and I look forward to their testimony. I reserve the balance of my time. Go ahead and yield back. Well, I'll yield back, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Upton yielded his 5 minutes for his opening statement to me in accordance with committee rules, and as his designee, I would like to recognize Ms. Blackburn, the Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I thank you for that well-stated opening statement that sets the playing field for this hearing. The other night, I was watching a documentary on Ronald Reagan. We've all been looking at the centennial of his birth, and I was reminded of a statement that he said during the 1980 campaign. And it was that a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job, and recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his job. Now, unfortunately, we can't sit around and wait for a change in administration to begin this recovery. So, Madam Chairman, as you said in your statement, it is time for us to do some things differently and to make some well-placed changes. I have to disagree with my colleague from North Carolina that the stimulus bill was a good first step. When you talk to people in my district, which I do every single week, they are telling you that there is a lot wrong. And when you have a stimulus bill that has unemployment above 9%, over 21 months of this, when you've got underemployment even higher, up in 15, 17, 20%, depending on where you are, it says things are not right. What we hear from our constituents and what I'm hearing in the listening sessions that I'm holding every week in my district, what I hear from people is that the long arm of government with regulation is killing the incentives to create jobs. What I am hearing is uncertainty on tax and regulatory policy is a killer when it comes to creating and retaining or expanding jobs. What we are hearing is that they want government to get out of the way to provide some certainty, and they want us to focus on creating the environment that will allow jobs growth to take place. I thank the chairman. I yield back my time.
I thank the gentlelady. And now I'd like to recognize the chairman emeritus of the committee for 2 minutes, Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. We appreciate you holding this hearing. We welcome our witnesses, the Honorable Assistant Secretary Fernandez, and our witnesses on the private sector panel after that. Downstairs, we're having a food fight on health care with the Secretary of Health and Human Services. There's quite a disagreement between the Republicans and the majority on that issue. But on this issue, there should be agreement on both sides of the aisle that we actually do all support the creation of jobs and the creation of a robust economy. We tend to be gloomy and doomy when we talk about the ability of our economy to create jobs, and it's true that we have been in a recession the last several years. Having said that, on the positive side, unless one of our expert witnesses corrects me, my understanding is that our manufacturing sector produced more goods and services last year than any year in history. My perception is that in terms of productivity per worker, the American worker is still the most productive worker in the world. My perception is that in terms of productivity increase, we have doubled and perhaps tripled the productivity of the average American worker in the last 20 to 25 years. So we do have an economy that has a robust manufacturing capability. Having said that, we have the ability in Washington, by high taxes, by regulatory overkill, to stifle and threaten that productivity. So hopefully this hearing will give us some roadmaps about how to increase productivity, how to unleash the economic entrepreneurship of America, and how to keep us number one and make us more competitive in the world markets. With that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank the
Madam Chairman.
Just one, before we go to your side, I'd like to recognize for the last minute a new member of the committee, Mr. Guthrie from Kentucky.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I come from a small business manufacturing background and know firsthand what is needed to allow job creators to remain competitive. We cannot be a country that does not make things. As a manufacturer, I'm familiar with the very serious uncertainty that our job creators face today, many of which we'll be discussing in this committee. Today we live in the world's most productive economy, but we can't take it for granted. The United States faces greater competition as our business sees every day from China, India, Brazil, and the EU. And I applaud the Chairwoman's willingness to reopen the book on our economic policy with an eye towards innovation and job creation. Look forward to reevaluating the related policies within the committee's jurisdiction. It is fitting that Congress does the same, although I do hear mostly from people and from businesses I'm familiar with is not just concerned about what Congress is doing, but the excess regulatory burden that's coming from the administration. They say, didn't we just have an election, but we're still hearing these things are coming forward after they felt like they made a correction in the election. So we look forward to discussing where the administration is going with that, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Madam Chairman, it appears that the gentlelady from Illinois has arrived, and in the absence of the ranking member of the full committee, I would ask unanimous consent that she be allowed to use the time that Mr. Waxman would have otherwise used.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Ranking Member. I'm so glad that we're here today to talk about jobs because, frankly, from my point of view, from my perspective, the new majority has done absolutely nothing to create jobs for the American people since they've been in charge. Quite to the contrary. Instead, they want to gut federal programs in a way that economists say will eliminate jobs, slow our economic growth, and put hardship on the American people, and spend time doing things like conducting a radical social campaign against women and family planning. Yesterday, Ben Bernanke said that under Republicans' continuing resolution, we could lose, quote, a couple 100,000 jobs, unquote. Economist Mark Zandi, who was an advisor to John McCain, has said the bill could cost us 700,000 jobs. And even Goldman Sachs, not that I'm a fan of Goldman Sachs, but they've estimated that it could cut our gross domestic product by 2%. And the Republican response so far has been, so be it. And Americans deserve better than that. We need to make investments in our nation by building a strong infrastructure, educating our kids, supporting industries like nanotechnology, which is really great. In my district, partnerships in the private and the public sector with Northwestern University and spin-off companies, and renewable energy, which have the potential to create millions of good jobs. So now I see that our ranking member of the full committee has arrived, and I'd like to yield the rest of my time to him.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your taking the opportunity to talk about the hearing for today. Job growth must be our number one priority, but I'm concerned that the policies being pursued by the House would have the opposite effect. They would eliminate jobs, not create them. A recent analysis from Goldman Sachs concluded Republican spending cuts in the CR could significantly reduce U.S. economic growth, thereby decreasing job growth and further slowing down the recovery. An analysis from Moody's Analytics concluded that the Republican spending cuts could result in up to 700,000 fewer jobs by the end of the fiscal year. Slower growth and fewer jobs are clearly steps in the wrong direction for this country. American families are facing real economic pain. For millions, their jobs are gone, their savings depleted, their homes' values down, their belief in the promise of the American dream diminished. We have a responsibility to these Americans to not only keep moving along a path of job growth, but to act reasonably and responsibly to accelerate the growth of recent months. So how do we get there? The President has called for the United States to out-educate, out-innovate, and out-build our competitors, and I believe we are up to that challenge. In order to meet that challenge, we need targeted public and private investments in key sectors that will grow our economy and create jobs. One key sector is education. The U.S. is near the bottom of industrialized nations in math and science literacy. We must invest in science, technology, engineering, and math to compete with the rest of the world. Another key sector is research and development. In order to retain America's competitive edge, we must always be planning for the future. Basic research must be advanced in all areas, including manufacturing, biomedical, clean energy, cybersecurity, and information technologies. And finally, we must invest in our infrastructure, both our physical infrastructure, like crumbling roads and bridges, and our virtual infrastructure encompassing computing, networking, and wireless spectrum. I agree we need to put our nation's fiscal house in order, but we should not choke our economic recovery. That would be profoundly counterproductive. We're facing revenue shortfalls because we have fewer people working and contributing to the federal treasury. Boosting job growth and boosting consumer spending leads to increased federal revenues as more people return to tax rolls. All of this leads us to the long-term goal that we all share of protecting our fiscal future. We must spend responsibly, but most importantly in the short and midterm, we must focus on growing our economy and creating jobs. We must focus on investing in education, innovation, and modern infrastructure to ensure we stay ahead of our competitors around the world. Madam Chairman, I'm glad we're having a hearing on job growth, and I look forward to working in a bipartisan way to solve our pressing fiscal issues. And I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. And now we recognize we're going to have two panels before us today. Each of the witnesses has prepared an opening statement, as is customary. They will be placed in the record. Each of you will have 5 minutes to summarize that statement in your remarks. On our first panel today, we're very pleased to have the Honorable John Fernandez, Assistant Secretary of Commerce, Economic Development Administration. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Secretary, and your 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much, Chairman Bono Mack and Ranking Member Butterfield, members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today on behalf of the Economic Development Administration. I applaud the leadership for the subject of this hearing. I think it's near and dear to all of us, and it's at a critically important time in our country's history. A few weeks ago, President Obama released his proposed budget for fiscal year 2012. Represents a fiscally responsible plan to rebuild our economy, win the future by innovating, out-educating, out-building our global competitors, and creating the jobs and industries of tomorrow. The budget focuses our federal resources in critical areas of education, innovation, clean energy, and infrastructure. It proposes to reform how Washington does business, putting more federal funding up for competition, cutting waste, and reorganizing government so it can better serve the American people. You know, all of us know that economic development is not easy, even in difficult or better times. And we certainly know that the reality is that economic development has changed significantly in the 45 years since EDA was created. We can no longer count on, build it, and they will come economic development strategies of the 20th century. These strategies don't work in today's global economy. The Department of Commerce and EDA are providing leadership to the administration's effort to build a more innovation-driven, more entrepreneurial economy. In particular, to spur innovation, we must cultivate competitive, high-performing regional economies as the foundation for national growth. EDA's Jobs and Innovation Partnership puts a premium on regional innovation cluster strategies as a platform for linking multiple initiatives across the administration and the nation's metropolitan areas and rural communities. The Jobs and Innovation Partnership is designed to cultivate private-public partnerships and support strategies that capitalize on regional assets to create jobs and encourage business expansion. Importantly, the investments we make support bottom-up strategies developed by local and regional leaders. This orientation that the best ideas bubble up from regional and small business leaders is a critical element in our partnership. Here's a few examples of the kinds of investments we've recently made. EDA invested a little over $2 million in Jumpstart, which is a venture development organization in Cleveland, Ohio, to promote innovation and small business development in 6 Midwest cities. EDA provided a small but catalytic grant to the city of Nashwauk, Minnesota, to build critical infrastructure that was needed to secure the development of the new SR Steel plant, which was a $1.6 billion project, which was projected to create about 2,800 jobs. EDA helped fund the Water and Energy Technology Incubator in Central Valley, Fresno County, to nurture and grow water and energy technology businesses. Since its opening, more than 15 companies have been formed and leveraged over $17 million in private capital, creating jobs for Central Californians. I wanted to also make a note about the American Competes Act, which was reauthorized by Congress last year. I really appreciate the strong bipartisan support for that piece of legislation. It provides the tools that EDA needs to encourage and support more of this kind of regional innovation strategy. We work hand in hand with many of our other federal agencies to promote and advance such regional strategies. In 2010, the White House Interagency Task Force for the Advancement of Regional Innovation Clusters launched the first ever joint federal funding opportunity, which involves 6 other federal agencies, including in this partnership with the Department of Energy, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Department of Labor, Department of Education, the SBA, and the National Science Foundation. We're currently working through this interagency process to identify even additional opportunities to accelerate regional innovation clusters. There should be no doubt in today's global economy that regions matter. Our most serious competitors don't come from the town just down the road or across the state line. They come from around the world, from India, Germany, Singapore, China, and too many other countries to name. So Chairman Bono Mack and members of the subcommittee, I certainly do appreciate the opportunity to be here today, talk about our efforts at our agency to support competitiveness of Americans' regions so that we can continue to provide the kinds of opportunities for the people throughout the country. And I look forward to answering your questions today and working closely with Congress to help strengthen our communities and small businesses. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary, and Chair will recognize herself for the first 5-minute round of questions. And so, Secretary Fernandez, thank you very much for being here today. It's a pleasure to meet you. Some of my questions are going to be tough and to the point. My goal isn't to assign blame for our nation's economic problems. My goal is to find solutions. As the ranking member said, all of us here want the same thing, a very strong and vibrant, prosperous America. But here's my first question. In this week's Bloomberg Business Week, one of our nation's smartest minds, Mary Meeker, looks at the United States as a business and asks, would you invest in a company that lost $2 trillion last year and has a net worth of a negative $44 trillion? So, Secretary Fernandez, how would the administration answer that question, and how do we make Made in America matter again?
Well, I think the administration would absolutely respond with a resounding yes. I mean, there's clearly challenges that we've had to face with following the financial meltdown and some of the transformational things that are happening in the global economy. But I think America is incredibly well positioned to build on the leadership we've had in innovation. As Chairman Barton mentioned, we have some of the most productive workers in the world. We have some of the most innovative companies in the world. But there's certainly, and I think we all agree, that there are areas where we need to seriously tackle some of these challenges. The President's been clear that, he supports reforming our corporate tax structure so it can be more competitive globally. We're serious about looking at the kinds of regulatory reform that can help spur innovation.
On that note, let me jump in. 5 minutes is so quick, but Mr. Secretary, I'd like to. Smart, successful businesses in America all have good business plans, and usually they're flexible. They're flexible enough to evolve over time as market conditions change. What would you say are the essential elements of the administration's business plan when it's on the same? I'm asking the same question that you're answering, but if you could continue, I guess, in that vein.
Well, what I could say, Madam Chairman, is that I think, candidly, your opening comments laid out a large range of issues that are critically important. That I think there's tremendous opportunities for bipartisan support. The tax structure has to be competitive. We have to invest in innovation. We have to support education, 21st century infrastructure. I think there are many places where the Congress and the administration can work together because, again, the whole notion of this hearing about making it in America is essentially important to all of us, and we embrace that objective, and I think we can work together on it.
Well, we all agree, and we're all saying we want to work together, but something clearly isn't working. Unemployment has been stuck at more than 9% for a record 20 straight months. So I was a small business owner. I owned a small restaurant, and I knew on a first-hand basis that for me to have succeeded as a restaurateur, the government needed to get out of the way. And I think that's what, as the Vice Chairman said, that's what we're all looking for is government to get out of the way and let the private sector lead the way. Can you speak to that a little bit? Are you hearing the same thing that we're hearing that the Vice Chair talked about, that the government needs to get out of the way and actually help by getting out of the way, by removing the impediments to growth?
What I hear and what my experience has been is that certainly the private sector is going to be the driver and source of innovation and job creation. There's no dispute about that. But the government has a critical role to play as well.
But right now there are rules and regulations that are imposed that cost Americans more than $1.75 trillion a year. So how does that reconcile? Those two don't reconcile at all. To put in some perspective, the federal budget deficit is projected to be $1.4 trillion. So if we're going to create jobs, how do we provide a more fair and sensible, predictable regulatory regime? What we're saying and what we're doing are not reconciling at all.
Well, as the President has said, and he said in the State of the Union, and he said it since then, is that we actually do support regulatory review. We want to weed out the kind of regulations that are outdated and aren't productive or necessary, but finding and maintaining those that actually do serve a valid public good.
Can you name a quick 2 or 3 that you've already found?
Well, I can't. For me, no. We are currently at the EDA. In fact, we've published an RFI, and we're reviewing all of our regulations as well. We're a small agency, but we think there's probably rules within our own system that are obstacles and slow down the process, particularly as we want to build private-public partnerships.
Well, I look forward to working with you on that in the future, and I would like to yield back my time and recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Let me spend my time, Mr. Secretary, talking about infrastructure. My district in North Carolina will never recover unless we can invest in infrastructure and invest significantly in infrastructure. And so this is very dear to me. We have heard time and time again that private investment drives the economy, and certainly that's true. We've heard that it's time for the federal government to stop spending money, and we all hear that when we go home, and to a certain extent that is also true. We also hear that it's time for the federal government to just get out of the way. We heard that from the Vice Chair of the committee this morning, and we hear it from time to time. While I agree that the private sector is and should remain the driver for economic growth and prosperity, public investments can indeed help fuel private sector growth by lowering costs for American businesses. As the Association of Manufacturers suggests, investments in infrastructure can help manufacturers more efficiently move people, products, and ideas. And so my question to you, sir, is can you please explain to this subcommittee and to all who are interested how investments in modern infrastructure like roads and railroads and ports can improve the efficiency and competitive capacity of America's businesses?
Well, let me just say this. I think generally there's no silver bullet that's going to address all of the economic challenges we face, but you have to have a holistic approach. 21st century infrastructure that's efficient, that can move product, can move digital products as well as hard products. Those are all essential to having the kind of climate where companies can be successful and create jobs and provide opportunities. But, you know, today's infrastructure has to, in my judgment, certainly include some of the traditional basic infrastructure, but it also includes a lot of innovation infrastructure. It means, you know, STEM education, investments in the research and development that could be commercialized to create whole new industries that we haven't even thought of, and looking at how we create the kind of ecosystem, if you will, in regions where the private sector can flourish. And I think infrastructure in a broad way is a very important part of
What about broadband infrastructure?
Absolutely.
And the power grid?
Sure. I mean, smart grid, we've made significant investments as part of the Recovery Act to enable the development of smart grid to more effectively distribute energy, but also enable whole new lines of products to be developed around energy efficient manufacturing, new appliances, et cetera. So I think there's tremendous opportunities in smart grid, in broadband, wireless technology. Those are all the essential infrastructures of a really growing, effective global economy.
And having said all of that, can the private sector be economically or be profitable without any public assistance whatsoever, in your opinion?
Well, as I said before, I think there's a strong critical role for the private sector and there's a strong critical role for the public sector. And I think, you know, my experience as mayor and working at the local level is that our economy works best when we have those kind of strong private-public partnerships. There's a role for both sectors to play that are critically important, and we do best when we work together.
On the subject of manufacturing, and I have a minute and a half left, although the dominance of the American manufacturing sector has been chipped away for some time, our country remains the world's largest manufacturing economy. According to the manufacturers, again, we produce 21% of global manufactured products. Japan and China follow at 13 and 12. Our continued dominance shows that America is still a place where we can do and make things. and our financial security, along with our long-term national security, demand that we continue to do so. For years, even before the recession, we heard about the offshoring and loss of jobs from the U.S., but as we continue to recover from the recession, it's the manufacturing sector that has proven to be among the bright spots in a slow recovery. The manufacturing sector has been growing for the last 19 months, make no mistake about it. And this past January, manufacturing activity turned in its best performance since May of 2004. Even more surprising, companies like GE and Ford, among others, have announced that they are moving jobs out of China, Japan, and other countries and back to our country. To use the words that the chairman used in her opening statement, they are beginning to insource. These aren't just jobs, but the sort of good-paying jobs that we need more of right now and in the long term. Do you know what's driving the growth in the manufacturing sector? In just a few seconds, do you know what's driving the growth?
I think what's driving it is the ingenuity and productivity of the leadership in our companies and the workers that help build our companies.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the vice chair, Ms. Blackburn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And a question for you, because I've got some counties that we have some unemployment problems on there. The counties where you have given grants, is there any statistically significant difference in the unemployment rate between the counties that you have had grants in the last 5 years and those that you have not?
We've not engaged in any kind of detailed analysis that could answer that question.
So you don't know if what you're doing is working or not?
What I believe your question is one that we can't answer with the studies we've done, but I can tell you that the investments we make have very direct leverage. Our grants are tied to specific partnerships where there's immediate private sector leverage, there's public match dollars, and they've certainly made an impact on the communities where we make those investments, yes.
Okay, so but you've not had a serious study to look at this to make a determination if the taxpayer is getting their dollars worth?
We're confident that taxpayers are getting their money's worth. We report out findings on a 3, 6, 9-year basis following our investments. There's been 2 independent studies that were done to look at the accuracy of the reporting out, one by Rutgers in 97, another by Grant Thornton in 2008, and they validated the measures that were used by the EDA and by our grantees that report out the economic impact of the grants we make.
Okay, well, I've got, let's take this as a for instance,
okay,
because, you know, I think it concerns me when you all don't do the kind of evaluation of what you're getting for this money. And as I said in my opening statement, you can look at what is happening with unemployment and see something's not working right. And that is what frustrates the American people. And as I mentioned, I've been working with my chambers of commerce and local communities, and we're doing job creation listening sessions. And there is a laundry list of things that they think are being done inappropriately. Let me talk about 2 of my counties, Wayne and Perry County. Unemployment has hovered around 20%. If you look at your EDA eligibility requirements, then you could say that much of the country is going to qualify for EDA assistance. So tell me what processes are in place to ensure that projects are created in the most severely economically depressed counties. How are you all making that evaluation?
Well, as you know, the way our grants are made are through a competitive grant system. And so as a baseline, there has to be some eligibility criteria that's met. But then our decisions are based on the strength of the applicants and the proposals that they make. And as we evaluate those applications, we look at the extent of the...
Have you ever been to Tennessee, to Wayne or Perry counties? Or?
I'm not familiar with the counties. I've certainly been to Tennessee, yes.
Of what part?
To Memphis, to Nashville.
Okay, all righty. Your agency has photos posted on your website of international travel to Lyon, to Brussels, in November and December of 2010. Your website indicates EDA officials are going to go to Hanover, Germany, April 3rd through 8th, 2011. So please submit to this committee in writing all past international travel over the past 2 years, the purpose of that international travel, including the itineraries and the cost of that international travel, and names and positions of the federal status of the staff attending all international trips. I would also like to know if attendees traveled in coach or business class in specific flights. Additionally, please detail with similar information, the Hanover, Germany trip and all planned future international trips. And I would love for you to explain to me the purpose of EDA's participation in these international trips. If EDA is promoting U.S. competitiveness and export abroad, I would say, maybe that's the role of the Foreign Commercial Service. And during the State of the Union address, the President singled out export.gov as government waste and duplication. So do you believe one more agency's presence in promoting U.S. exports abroad is necessary? And if so, do you believe the FCS is unable to do its job effectively?
Reserving the right to object.
Well, I'd be happy to provide all the information that you've requested.
Thank you. I look forward to it. I yield back.
May I be heard for point of order, Madam Chairman?
The gentleman may be heard.
I've asked the staff if it's appropriate for a member of the subcommittee to posit this type of question to a witness, and I'm told that it is an appropriate ask. But I would ask the gentlelady if she would be so kind as to make the same request in writing so that there would be some clarity about the request. Yes.
I will be happy to submit the request in writing. I think that as we look at the purpose of the EDA, and I appreciate the ranking member's question, that this is information that we want to know. We're looking at why we are not getting jobs creation in this country. We're hearing from our listening sessions that there is a problem and a disconnect between the federal government and the communities. And I would suggest to the gentleman and to the secretary that we may be looking at one of the disconnects and a place we can go after some redundancy.
Will the gentleman yield, please? Will the ranking member yield?
I believe it may still be my time. If it's on the point of order, I yield to the gentleman.
Yeah, Madam Chairman and members of the committee, it seems to me that this line of questioning should appropriately be addressed on the subcommittee on oversight. I think that the energies and time and efforts of this committee should be more focused on looking at policy issues rather than looking at travel itineraries for members of the administration, and I strongly concur with the positions of the ranking member. And I think it's just a waste of our time and a waste of the secretary's time to have his staff dedicated to these purposes. If the author of the request, if she really wanted to be I'm not sure if she's a member of the Oversight Subcommittee, but maybe that's the appropriate place where this activity should take place.
Yes, I'll yield to the chairman.
I appreciate the ranking member yielding to me, and I would just like to say that this committee does have oversight, and I believe the questions are relevant, and she has offered to present them to you in writing, which is customary, and I would like to know if the ranking member is comfortable with that.
I will continue to reserve my right to object until we can see the written document, and then I will probably withdraw it. Yes.
All right.
We'll move on. Thank you. I yield back.
All right. The chair would like to recognize Ms. Schakowsky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Our chairwoman has said that the businesses that she is familiar with and business in general just wants government to get out of the way. Secretary, I wanted to ask you if you have ever seen a business lobbyist who was here not to get rid of government, but perhaps to get government to weigh in on the side of business. Have you ever seen that?
I'm sorry, the question is, have I seen him?
Yeah, the assertion was that all that business wants is for government to get out of the way. I'm wondering if you, like me, have ever been approached by businesses who actually want something from government, would like something done for business by government. Have you ever seen that?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, let's just be clear and honest about that it works both ways, that there are things that the business community, through its legion of lobbyists, are on the Hill all the time for things not to get government out of the way, but actually to get government involved. I'm not objecting to that. I'm simply making that point. And there's also been some suggestions that I'm wondering if you could describe the way in which the president's budget, which does cut $41 billion from spending, how it actually would have more success in job creation, in your view, or not, than what the majority has suggested in terms of its continuing resolution.
Thank you. The president's budget, I think, strikes the right balance, which is we've got to get our fiscal house in order. He's made a proposal for a 5-year freeze in non-defense discretionary spending, which would save about $400 billion. And in the meantime, though, we have to prioritize investments that are going to make us strong and create an economy that can compete effectively internationally. And, you know, the idea that investments in education and STEM and R&D and 21st century infrastructure, I think those are things that, frankly, I hear from the private sector as well are essentially important to provide the right kind of environment where their companies can be successful. So I think the notion of that everyone, I think, can find agreement on is that we have to make these kinds of foundational investments that create the conditions where you can have competitive industries that can innovate and grow and provide jobs for our people. And you have to have the right balance so that you're making tough choices on the budget to get our fiscal house in order. And that's the president's proposal, and obviously we think it's a sound one to move the country forward.
Thank you. Let me just make one other comment about rules and regulations. That going back to what the president had said in his State of the Union address, and that you verified that there is a regulatory review, let's be clear. We should all be clear that the American people do want some rules of the road, and they don't want to have their children suffer from asthma, from bad air, and from bad water. They want safe food. In fact, 81% of Americans say they want safe food. I would imagine that there would be businesses in the states that would want to make sure that there's some regulatory framework to protect them from perhaps unsafe items that are coming from another country. Can you just speak to that in the minute that's remaining?
Well, you know, I'm not sure what I can add to the statement other than that, again, I think that, you know, the president's proposal is to have a serious, honest review of the regulations that are currently in place, weed out those that are unnecessary and overly burdensome that really don't maximize public good. And I think we can strike a balance on the kinds of regulations that actually serve the public well, but do protect it while we enable the businesses to grow and the economy to flourish.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Fernandez, thank you for being here. I know you've looked forward to this day for a long time. It's just one of those
at least since Friday when I was asked to do this.
Yeah, I understand. Well, and look, I appreciate the fact that you have a responsibility to present and represent the administration's views. But when we sit here and talk about the president's budget, you say it strikes the right balance, and you mentioned the 5-year freeze. But that's at current levels, so the 5-year freeze, correct?
Correct.
And so after we spent the last 2 years running those numbers up, would it not make more sense to you that perhaps we're better off if we scale back that, and then freeze a lower level? Would that not have a better impact on job creation and the burden in this country?
I think reasonable people are going to have different opinions about that.
Well, and I understand. I'm putting you in a little bit of a spot here, and I understand the team concept
on the big bucks, right?
On how you have to do that. I understand that. But when you talk about that, you know, and I know you didn't mention, but the president and the administration has said that if that under his plan, I believe that by the year 2017 that it would cut the annual deficit in half. I think is my understanding. But when we hear those things in perhaps a 30-second soundbite, when we look at those real numbers, that half is still more than 50% of former President Bush's highest year on the deficit. And so what we want to do is, you know, look, we just want the truth, whatever that is. Let us deal with it and try to work. There's no doubt we have a common goal here, which is to create jobs, improve the economy. When I look at my state in Mississippi, I haven't found a business yet or an industry yet that says we're underregulated. Have you identified any business that you've worked with that says, hey, we need more regulations? Have you found one in your journey so far?
Well, let me just say that I think what I hear the most, honestly, is that the people I work with are looking for the right balance. They want a partnership that's effective, and they respect the roles that the public sector and the private sector can play. But I think people genuinely want to work together to move the economy forward. If you were looking across the board as you look at the idea of job creation, is there any particular agency that you hear the most complaints about from the businesses that you talk to? Not judging those complaints, but is there any one that you hear more out of than another? There's none that I hear more about than any of the others. Okay. You talked about the competitive grant situation, and we just got a little bit of time left. But when you're looking at that, do you have a ratio or an amount that you look at as far as the management costs or the administration costs versus, say, a percentage of what that is as to what is done by grant, the amount of the grant? Is there some rule of thumb that you use or any of that nature as to how to keep those in balance or in check? Just to be clear, the administrative cost to the agency or to the grantee? Yes. We don't look at the agency cost directly because the truth is it's a pretty modest budget. So the administrative cost to the EDA of any particular grant versus another is going to be really de minimis. Okay. What we look at is there a strong partnership? Is there a good strategy in place? Are they building on the assets that are going to enable sustainable economic growth? Is there a commitment of leadership from the private sector as well as the public sector in that community around that strategy? Okay. And I should note that, you know, when it comes to EDA, and this was part of the question earlier, is that, you know, it's not free money. A very important part of the way our agency works is that people have to put skin in the game. So by statute, we have a minimum match requirement of 50%. And in many cases, since it is a competitive system, folks come in with more. Okay. And it's that kind of leverage, bottom-up strategy that I think actually does produce very real results. And when you're looking at that competitive grant situation, how do you balance or eliminate or disregard, say, political interests that might be a part of who the grantee or the recipient might be? Well, we do it in a couple of ways. One is that it's a transparent, competitive process. Secondly, the money that's appropriated to the EDA gets dispersed out and allocated across our 6 regional offices. There are no political appointees in any of those 6 offices, and they make the decisions about where the grant dollars go. And I think the bipartisan support that's been strong over the years for EDA. Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you very much. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman and recognize the gentleman from Illinois for 5 minutes, Mr. Resch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There's a global demand for greener, sustainable economies, which include a global demand for clean energy technologies. The U.S. used to dominate the field for the invention and manufacture of clean energy technologies. Today, our nation lags behind other nations for clean energy investments, innovation, and manufacture. China spends roughly $12 billion monthly. That's per month on new energy technologies and export expansions. In 2006, U.S. public investment in renewable energy was less than 1/4 of that for the entire year. A venture capitalist who was an early investor in Google sized up America's investments in its energy future in the following way, and I quote, "America spends more on potato chips than we do on new energy research and development," end of quote. I mean, we all like potato chips, but it's the price of oil that shot up 20+ cents in the last weeks. So we might be wise to spend more money on finding an alternative for such a volatile energy source than we do on our consumption of potato chips. If we want to stay globally competitive, if we want to secure our energy future, we must invest in research and development of clean energy technologies. And President Obama acknowledged this fact, stating, and I quote, "We can make the investments that will allow us to become the world's leading exporter of renewable energy. We can let the jobs of tomorrow be created abroad by some other nation, or we can create those jobs right here in America and lay the foundation for our lasting prosperity for our children and for our grandchildren." Can you answer the questions? I have 3 questions. What is the Department of Commerce doing to help U.S. companies become leaders in clean energy technology? What is the Commerce Department doing to ensure that the U.S. is at the forefront of energy and resource efficiency? And lastly, do we have the highly skilled workforce needed to fill these technological and green jobs right now?
Well, the agenda to drive clean energy and the sustainable development, the green economy, if you will, is broad, and it covers a lot of departments throughout the federal government. Commerce is certainly engaged in it. The work that's happening in the U.S. Patent and Trade Office around protecting IP is an essential part of the innovations in the green economy. Our export agencies are certainly engaged. EDA, we work with communities, particularly on the building the partnerships between the workforce component to have the kind of skills and the capacity to work in those industries. And we certainly are involved in some of the investment decisions through our competitive grant systems that have enabled communities either to build, as I mentioned in the opening testimony, the incubators around clean technology, other investments in infrastructure for some of the large manufacturing plants that are part of the clean tech economy. So there's a wide range of activities that commerce is involved in. But overall, I mean, clearly President Obama and this administration have made clean technology, clean manufacturing a very important centerpiece of the recovery programs as well as the ongoing economic development priorities. The Recovery Act had significant investments that have paid off, frankly, in terms of the tax credits to encourage manufacturing and in the green energy efficient areas. So there's clearly a big commitment, and it's a big priority for this administration.
The President's call for the doubling of exports in the next 5 years. Can you tell us what you believe are the manufacturing sectors with the highest potential for increasing exports, and what can we do to improve growth in these sectors and to help them remain globally competitive?
Well, clearly, exports are an essential part of the manufacturing economy, and the U.S. manufacturing sector is a major exporter. It's one of the largest export components of the American economy. I couldn't tell you the specific industries, but I'd be happy to get that information from our colleagues at ITA or somewhere else within the department.
Thank the gentleman. And the chair recognizes Mr. Guthrie of Kentucky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I appreciate it. And I'm glad that you're focused on job creation as well. One of the struggles that I've seen in my time in Congress is just the astounding array of regulations that are coming, that are prepared, that are being put forth, and business people are concerned. Yesterday, the Kentucky Farm Bureau, not the insurance agent, but the farmers from my area were in town, and they talked about the Farm Bill in passing. Their biggest concern was what EPA was going to do to the farm, and just concern, from making milk a biohazard. I mean, those just different things that are coming forward that we see. And it's the same in manufacturing. I'm from Kentucky, a manufacturing state. We have 93% of our energy is from coal. Coal makes it cheaper. We have a vast, if you go up and down the Ohio River, just across from where you guys are, where you're from, and not too far from where you're from, you see manufacturing plants. And we're really concerned, and we're concerned about the job loss. So my question is the Commerce Department, which is the voice of business, working with these agencies to at least say, I know you've got a plan, I know you're going this direction, but this is what it's going to do to American business, American manufacturing. Is there any interagency dialogue about what they're doing?
Well, there's certainly a significant amount of interagency dialogue, and the Commerce Department, among others, has opportunities to weigh in on proposals that are coming through the administration.
And somebody said it, and I'll say it tongue-in-cheek because they said it, but it has some truth to it. They said, just like we have the Trade Adjustment Act, maybe we should have the Regulation Adjustment Act for dislocated workers for what the regulatory environment is going to be doing. And that's a real concern out there. I know you know it because you probably hear it from people that are there. But what about the energy prices that we're seeing? I mean, I know we have the offshore drilling ban that was lifted, but the permitting process is going forward. It's difficult to get a permit in Appalachia today. I know it's not your area, your group, but I mean, what is there discussions with the administration about what this is actually going to be doing to our economy? Maybe we are seeing some recovery if we see it turn backwards because of high energy prices. I know there's some issues with the Middle East and oil prices. I understand that, but also I think energy prices were rising prior to what we've seen over the last month in the Middle East. If you just talk about what's happening here, I would appreciate that.
Well, you're right. That's usually a subject matter that I'm not as engaged in as others might be within the administration. So I'd be happy to, follow up with you with some responses from some of my colleagues. I can say that having a sound, affordable, clean energy is important to our economy, and that's certainly the kind of investments the administration wants to make. But again, I come back to my opening point about how, the president and this administration are genuinely committed to looking at our current regulatory structure, weeding out unnecessary regulations that do get in the way and don't necessarily serve the purpose they might have when they were first promulgated, and coming up with a reasonable balanced structure here that can enable innovation to survive and thrive and grow and protect the public interest at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizing Mr. Pompeo from Kansas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Fernandez, for coming out today. We had a chance to speak just briefly before this hearing commenced, and I've spent until 8 weeks ago my life in the manufacturing world, and I was looking at your prepared testimony in preparation for today. I have to share with you, I had never heard of EDA until about that moment in time. I would guess that when I went back to Kansas and talked to manufacturers there, they likely would not have heard of it either. And if I asked them what would be most important to them growing their business, they would not talk to me about rolling the roulette wheel and catching a grant from EDA, but rather would talk to me about regulations and taxes and that kind of thing. So I thought I'd share that with you before I sort of dug into a couple of specific questions. So in here you talk about a $1.4 million grant to Nashwauk, Minnesota, that leveraged a $1.6 billion plant. So do I have that right?
We were part of that plan, yeah.
Is it your testimony that absent your $1.4 million grant, that the $1.6 billion investment would not have been made?
No. What I would say is that the grant we made was critically important to very small.
When you say critical, that's the key word. So if you had not made your grant, would that project have proceeded?
It would have made it more challenging.
$1.4 million as a part of I'm skeptical that was the $1.4 million. You've used the word critical or catalytic before. I am skeptical that a federal grant of $1.4 million is catalytic to a $1.6 billion investment.
No, and we try and be careful about that as well. There's always an economic development, the but-for arguments. But if I can, let me just...
And they're critical. Those but-for
absolutely.
articles are the justification for your agency's existence.
But let me answer the question, though, and maybe give you a little bit more background on that specific project. You know, the plant is not located in that particular town. That town's entire budget is barely over $1 million a year. Yet the water lines and the infrastructure that needed to connect up to this new plant went through that little town, and they needed to come up with the resources. And it was essential, and it was a tremendous opportunity for them to be able to get an EDA grant to fund that. They would have a very difficult time connecting this infrastructure to the plant because it was their responsibility.
Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, the time has expired. That little red light right in front of you. The chair recognizes Mr. Towns for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for having this hearing as well. We all agree that, Honorable Fernandez, that we need to get our physical house in order. We agree. But there are major differences of degree about how to accomplish that. Some argue that federal government should simply stop spending money. That's it. This notion makes no sense in the short term, during which the recovery hasn't fully taken hold, nor in the long term if we expect to raise enough revenue to pay down our debts. Completely halting our investments in R&D, education, and infrastructure would be devastating in the short and long term. Moreover, this suggested hands of approach by government ignores how much of the rest of the world operates. As much as we might like, we aren't living in a world defined by completely free and open competition. For example, at a hearing in the last Congress on growing U.S. trade in green technology, we learned that many countries places tariff and non-tariff trade barriers on green goods. Denmark, for one, has essentially mandated the use of Danish manufactured wind turbines. In addition, other countries are investing huge resources into new technologies. The United States now ranks 11th among the G20 countries for the intensity of its investments in clean energy and technology. My question to you, can you please describe some of the other barriers to access that United States manufacturers face when trying to enter the clean energy market of other countries? What can be done to reduce or to eliminate those barriers?
You know, let me just, it's probably going to get a little bit beyond my portfolio. But let me just say that I'd be happy to get more information to you on that. I think the biggest barrier is that we're looking for fair trade agreements where we can enable exports to from our country to have access to these growing markets. I think in terms of the clean energy, I mean, you know, the barrier here is frankly there's uncertainty about the market in the United States, the uncertainty about having a comprehensive energy policy, and some of those issues that create impediments to private sector and other financial institutions making big investments here. Until we resolve some of those issues, I think that's going to be a drag on our ability to invest more and become more competitive in the clean tech space.
Right. Well, what is the Commerce Department doing to help ensure that the United States is in the forefront of energy and resource efficiency? That's at your pay grade.
Yeah, the Department of Commerce, and certainly under Secretary Locke's leadership, has been very aggressive about enforcing trade agreements and going after some of the tariff barriers that create an uneven playing field for American companies. The Energy Department and others throughout the administration have made significant investments in new innovation in research and development and commercialization around clean tech opportunities. So we're investing, I think, in a significant way to grow that part of the economy.
Do we have people skilled enough to be able to handle these jobs? Do we have people qualified to do it?
I believe so, yes.
You don't think we need to do anything special to the workforce needed for these jobs?
The workforce to support the clean tech industry?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that, there's plenty of evidence that one of the challenges we have in our economy is there is a disconnect between the skills of some of the workforce and some of the jobs that are actually available. So, yes, we need to do more to improve the linkage in our workforce investments to build those opportunities to support these innovative new companies.
Right. Thank you very much. On that note, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. And before I recognize the next colleague of mine, I just want to point out to the newer members that we recognize for questioning in the order of appearance at the hearing, and that is protocol for the committee and its standard. So to everybody in the room, if it seems that I'm skipping over somebody, it's just the order of appearance. And looking down at my young colleagues on the front dais, if I ever had to be behind an offensive line, I would want to be behind all of you guys. Hopefully offensive and not defensive line. But Chair recognizes next Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, sir, for coming out. You're doing a great job. Maybe we'll have you back sometime. How do you like that idea?
I'd welcome the opportunity.
I think everybody agrees, when we talk about getting government out of the way of small business, we don't mean government disappears completely. We understand that there's a strategic partnership in some ways that needs to occur. I think where the concern is, from our part, is we've just seen a major overstep of that. To go from almost a partnership to a big brother or a father role, from the government plays. And I think that, frankly, is negative to what we want to see in small business. In fact, what I've seen is I've traveled around the districts, is businesses large and small, in many cases, they have the capital. They have the capital to invest and expand. But what they're concerned about is when they have to plan 10, 20, 30 years out in determining where to invest assets and determining where to go, they see a environment that just is continually shifting. It's like being on a waterbed. It's never stable. And so as they look out and say, well, I can either hang on to the money I have now, or I can make a risk in investing in the future, which frankly those risks in investing in the future is what drives this economy. They see an uncertain environment. So I think that's what's kind of the key is not that there's no role for government, but that the role for government needs to be stable in the long term as people try to plan things out. One of the other things that I hear a lot, especially I'm come from a heavy agriculture and a manufacturing district, is, and I've seen too, is the administration's failure to lead in the area of trade. I'm happy that we're starting to talk about and potentially, approving a trade agreement with South Korea. I think that's important, but we have pending trade agreements with Colombia and Panama. And given that 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States, I think in order to see manufacturing spark back to life, which I would love it to do, we do have to create a level playing field, and that level playing field is done through setting up some of these trade agreements. So as the administration's representative to business, have you discussed the regulatory environment, which we've talked about a little bit, but also a lot of that trade burdens and kind of the focus on getting us to where we can be competitive and not lose market share to China and India?
Yeah, sure, and the administration agrees with you that there are a number of pending trade agreements that we think would open up opportunities for American companies to export into a much fairer, freer system. So we support a number of those agreements and want to move forward.
How are we going to expect to see that in the very near future the administration take a leadership role then in getting those trade agreements through, including Panama, Colombia, and South Korea?
The Congress certainly has a role in moving those forward as well.
Okay. All right. So from what you're hearing, though, that's not it's not necessarily, because I've heard him lead talk about South Korea, which I'm appreciative of. I think that's important. But I haven't heard much lately on Colombia. I haven't heard much on Panama. And again, we're losing not just from the economic perspective, but there's a national defense and strategic advantage to having these trade agreements, especially when we deal with enemies on the folks to their east. Another question. Obviously, the GAO report that came out found 52 programs and 4 agencies that fund entrepreneurial efforts. And I've seen little evidence of your department's ability efforts to really work with some of these other agencies to find out areas of duplicative programs and figure out how to streamline it and make it to where we don't have all this over administration. We're no longer in an age, unfortunately, where we can afford this kind of waste. I mean, we've kicked the can down the road. We need to cut our spending, and this is an easy area to do it. So what's your plan to provide corrective action to ensure that the EDA is leveraging its assets to promote growth and limit duplicative process and waste?
I think it's a very fair question, and the work we do, as I mentioned in my opening statement, there's a tremendous amount of interagency collaboration going on right now. While there are a number of programs with the titles of economic development or community development, entrepreneurship, many of them are complementary, but what's essential is that we get alignment and leverage so we're not duplicating and wasting taxpayer money. We work very closely with our partners in the SBA and these other agencies to come together and build strategies that do look for that linkage and alignment so that we accelerate the rate of return and don't just create duplication.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. McKinley of West Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was curious about some of the opening remarks that were made about Goldman Sachs. I don't necessarily think they were. I think they were a bit of a poster child about problems on Wall Street, but their numbers are being used now, and about 700,000 jobs being lost if we continue this mission of being fiscally responsible. But then Chairman Bernanke came out and said that wasn't right. Those were gross misrepresentations. I'm just curious, was Bernanke right?
I guess I'm not, I didn't watch his testimony, so I'm not prepared to give you a good answer on that.
Just curious. Yeah. Thank you. Listen, I've always held the Commerce Department in high esteem because I think it has less of an agenda than some of the other departments. And I've seen in West Virginia, in the Northern District that I represent, we have lost 24,000 manufacturing jobs in the last 10 years. And as a state, in the last 25 years, we've lost over 100,000 manufacturing jobs to a point now when we can try to characterize it that manufacturing at one time with 150,000 manufacturing jobs. Now, if you put all the remaining manufacturing jobs that are left in West Virginia throughout all 3 districts, it wouldn't even fill Mountaineer Stadium with 50,000 people. I feel threatened for our economy when we're not. I'm hoping the Commerce Department will really address that. But I'm concerned because when I spoke with one of our senators, he said that, the fact that we have 15 million people in America out of work, he said, but they're getting unemployment insurance. Do you think the senators, other people don't get it, that people want a job, and it's our responsibility to be more definitive about getting those jobs rather than continuing it? On Saturday will be our 60th day for me to be in Congress. I have been to so many hearings, I've read so many reports, I've heard so much dialogue, but I haven't seen the plan that's going to put these people back to work. Someplace we have to do that, and it's concerned me that just earlier this week in another meeting, another hearing, and you were praising them, unfortunately. Commerce, someone came in with you were praising the regulatory bodies. But this regulatory body had the gall to say that the greenhouse gas emissions regulated under the Clean Air Act is going to create jobs. And in West Virginia, we know that's not accurate. But yet, that's what happens here in Washington is no one outside Washington believes that more government is going to create more private sector jobs. Only in the Beltway am I getting any sense that government is the solution. So I'm curious, how, given your opening statement that you said it's a fiscally responsible budget, that have $1.4 trillion deficits, and that we're still sitting with 9% unemployment. How can you defend, how can the Commerce that I held high regard, how can you sit and defend that your policies are the right policy, big government is better than reducing expenditures? Can you share that?
Sure. Again, I think that, the challenges we have today didn't happen overnight. And it's our judgment that you have to have a measured response. The President's proposal for deficit reduction based on the freeze on discretionary non-defense money is serious. We're not going to solve the entire fiscal situation in this country just looking at the discretionary part of non-defense part of the federal budget. There's a whole wide range of issues that will be addressed, I'm sure, by the Congress.
In the budget, does he have reductions in the entitlement? Does he have?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to get back.
Could you get back to me?
Yeah.
I'd like to know.
But I think that there's a very strong recognition that a lot of these tough issues are going to have to be addressed in a bipartisan way, and the administration is committed to doing that.
Can you provide something that would give me an indication of what has the EDA with your group, have they done any proactive positions or assistance in West Virginia in the last 2 years in the Northern District?
My light's lighting up.
Not responding, but you're trying to help, to lead the charge. And if you can't today, can you send that to me?
Sure, we've been very active in West Virginia.
I'd like it for the Northern District of West Virginia, with all that employment, 10.3% unemployment. If you could send that to me, I'd like to have it.
I'd be glad to.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Secretary, per Ms. Blackburn's comments, we now have her letter to you outlining her early request for the record. If you could just have your staff grab it from the clerk to your right before you leave, and you'll also get a copy of that electronically after the hearing. And we'd also like to state that we have other questions for the record, which we'll submit to you, and would appreciate your prompt responses in writing. And with that, I just would like to thank you very much for your appearance today, and to say to you, I think we want to work together along with Secretary Locke and make Made in America work again. And I look forward to it. And as my colleague, Mr. Kinzinger, said, we hope you're back here often in the good spirit that you are here with today. So thank you.
Thank you.
And at this point in time, we're going to take about a minute break while we change the panels out, and then get started again. So thank you again, Mr. Secretary.
All right.
Wasn't my favorite exercise, but we did it right without you.
Let's say
Yeah, I've got a colleague who would love to talk to you. I'll just tell him to give you a
great. Thanks.
Oh my goodness. So if you need a prompt. Yeah. So if you're talking about different issues. Oh, we got all sorts of things to talk about. Believe me. Hey, good to see you.
My pleasure.
Greg Wilson. Good.
Yeah, I do.
Well,
All right,
my all over the place is different from their all over.
Functions of it that are important.
Our second panel, we have, as you can see, 7 witnesses, and for some reason we're doing it flipped the way we ordinarily go left to right, but today we're doing stage right to left. But we have the 7 witnesses. Our first witness is Chris Cummisky, Commissioner of Georgia Department of Economic Development and Chairman of the Georgia Centers of Innovation Board of Directors. Our second witness is Drew Greenblatt. Mr. Greenblatt is President of the Marlin Steel Wire of nearby Baltimore, Maryland, and represents the National Association of Manufacturers. Also testifying before us today is no stranger to us all, Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Mr. Holtz-Eakin is President of American Action Forum. Our fourth witness is Gregory Wilson, Special Advisor to the Financial Services Roundtable. Our fifth witness is Ms. Deborah L. Wince-Smith. Ms. Wince-Smith is President and CEO of the Council on Competitiveness. Also testifying is Heather Boushey. Welcome, Heather. She is the Senior Economist at the Center for American Progress. And last but not least, Mr. Rhone Resch, welcome. He is the President and CEO of the Solar Energy Industries Association. Welcome to all of you. You're each recognized for 5 minutes, and to help keep track of the time are those nice little lights in front of you. And I would ask that when you see the red, you try to sum up as quickly as you possibly can. There are a lot of us to get through today and votes on the floor eventually. So we're going to start with Mr. Cummisky. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman and Ranking Member. I want to thank the subcommittee for this invitation to speak to you today and for taking the time to address these very important issues. The topic at hand, innovation in manufacturing, is one that is very close to our hearts in Georgia. We are a state that cultivates innovation and creativity in this very strategic industry. Like most states, we've lost manufacturing jobs during the recent economic downturn. But our recovery is coming. Our sector employment in Georgia has increased for the 4th consecutive month, and confidence levels remain high. This isn't your grandfather's manufacturing we're talking about. We are particularly strong in advanced manufacturing sectors like aerospace and automotive, both part of our strategic industry focus. Georgia aerospace manufacturing sector accounts for approximately 28,000 workers in the state, and our aerospace exports in 2010 grew 23% to an all-time high of $4.4 billion, 7th in the United States. Industry giants like Lockheed, Boeing, and Gulfstream are part of our corporate aerospace community. Georgia's automotive industry began in 1909 with a small Ford plant. Today, Kia has invested approximately $1 billion in its first United States auto facility. Kia is just one of our more than 300 auto and vehicle-related companies employing 20,000 workers. Other prominent automotive names are Pirelli Tire, Toyo Tire, ZF Industries, and Johnson Controls. The men and women who comprise Georgia's manufacturing workforce are highly motivated, skilled, and eager to embrace new ways of doing things. This is an attitude and an aptitude that we have deliberately cultivated in our workers in response to the challenges of the new world economy. We in Georgia realized very early that we would not be able to compete with other countries, particularly emerging economies, solely on the basis of wages. We're not just about low-cost manufacturing, we're about high-quality manufacturing. We enabled this through 3 key ways. First, Georgia stepped up early to ensure we had the most creative approach to workforce development in the nation. Education and training is the most critical part of the manufacturing innovation process in Georgia. We accomplish this through economic development partnerships with our universities and our 26 technical colleges. Our Georgia Quick Start program was the first of its kind in the United States and has become a national model for customized workforce training. Offered to qualified companies free of charge to the state since 1967, Quick Start is part of the technical college system of Georgia. It's a soup to nuts process. Quick Start personnel will travel to a company's home state or home country, see how they do their processes, replicate them through a variety of technology, and then bring them back here. The program gives hands-on training to new hires, trains existing workers on new processes, as well as staying with the company after it begins operation to continue to find trends and how it can be more efficient. Quick Start has delivered more than 5,800 projects for client companies and prepared more than 750,000 trainees. Possibly the best example of Quick Start's importance is this role in the Kia's decision to locate in Georgia. Quick Start built a $22 million state-of-the-art training facility that has trained each of the currently 2,200 Kia employees and is about to train another 800, helping the company reach its full operational capacity ahead of schedule. The chairman of Hyundai Kia has called Quick Start's training center a global benchmark, and the training center for Hyundai's new plant in Brazil is being modeled after the one here in Georgia. The concept has many imitators, but we are proud to have instituted the original program in the United States and to see it grow into something that for many companies is a deciding factor in their choice to locate or expand in the state of Georgia. Georgia Quick Start is a powerful solution to develop a skilled workforce for innovative manufacturers. Another way Georgia is strengthening our manufacturing sector is through our Centers of Innovation program, which is unique in the United States. We saw the need that entrepreneurs and small companies with the potential for high growth were often having difficulty moving products and services into commercialization. So in 2003, then Governor Sonny Perdue created the state-run program to connect them to Georgia's intellectual capital as universities, as well as the industry expertise they needed to jumpstart their growth. The Center of Innovation for Manufacturing is one of 6 such centers in Georgia. It provides expertise in advanced manufacturing processes, as well as customized training programs with the latest advanced robotics and PLC and CIM equipment, helping manufacturing companies develop a healthy bottom line. The center's friendly environment for research and development includes the latest prototyping equipment, allowing companies to test new ideas before investing the money. The center has worked with approximately 80 companies in the last 2 years, partnering frequently with the Georgia Institute of Technology to design innovative manufacturing processes and equipment and thus expand production. Soneva, for instance, is a great example of Georgia innovation blossoming from the ground up. This solar manufacturing company grew from successfully commercialized research at Georgia Tech. It manufactures the most efficient, low-cost photovoltaic cells on the market. The company is rapidly expanding its production capacity, and its new plant will open in 2011 with 400-plus megawatt capacity. Soneva was ranked last year by Wall Street Journal as the #2 venture capital-backed clean technology company in the United States and received the Renewable Energy Export of the Year award from the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Soneva was assisted along the way by the Georgia Center of Innovation for Energy. It's exactly the sort of company our Centers of Innovation program was created for. Another factor that sets us apart is our pro-business environment. Over the years, elected officials in Georgia have worked extremely hard to make sure the state regulatory and tax environment is such that it fosters business growth. Am I out of time?
Sum up very briefly, yes. I'm sorry, I can't see the clock.
Our corporate income tax rates are incredibly low and conducive to business, and our regulatory is very, very limited, which helps us thrive in this environment. But thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the round of statements.
Thank you. Mr. Greenblatt, you're recognized for, yes?
Chairman Bonomack, in the witness's defense, our timer is not working.
Then I apologize.
That's okay. I'll get over it.
I apologize. Mr. Greenblatt, you're recognized for 5 minutes. When the light turns yellow, I will make some funny faces at you, I guess, or something.
Good morning. My name is Drew Greenblatt. I'm the president of Marlin Steel Wire. We're based in Baltimore, Maryland. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers. We represent some 11,000 factories in all 50 states, all industries, all sizes. The title of today's hearing raises an issue that's close to my own heart. Marlin Steel Wire produces custom wire baskets like this and wire forms like this, precision sheet metal fabrication assemblies, all manufactured 100% in the USA. And we sell them all over the world. We export to over 34 countries. This week, Holland, Japan, Sweden, Ireland, and Canada. 25% of our employees are mechanical engineers or designers. Innovation and dedicated employees have helped expand sales and jobs since I bought the company in 1998. We achieved record sales 4 years in a row. Manufacturers are seeing signs of economic recovery, but we have a long way to go. Manufacturing lost 2 million jobs in the recession, and unemployment remains unacceptably high. Meanwhile, our competitors over in Europe, Asia, and South America aggressively seek new customers and new opportunities. Their countries strategize for success in manufacturing. Manufacturers believe the United States must also embrace a comprehensive approach, one that we outlined last year in our policy guide, our manufacturing strategy for jobs and a competitive America. First, we want to be the best country in the world to headquarter a country. Second, we want to be the best country in the world to do the bulk of our R&D, our research and development. Third, we want to be a great place to manufacture goods and exports. We start with the goal that the U.S. will be the best country in the world to headquarter a company. It's critical that our national tax climate does not place manufacturers in the United States at a competitive disadvantage in the global marketplace. This week, my company shipped wire baskets for a General Motors assembly line in Canada, where the corporate tax rate is less than half of what we pay. It's easier for my Canadian competitor since his taxes are lower. He has no health insurance. This is bad for me. This is bad for my workers. It means less jobs in the USA. A pro-manufacturing tax policy must first acknowledge that when Congress raises taxes, it makes manufacturing in the U.S. less competitive. Congress should lower the corporate tax rate to 25% or even lower, like Canada, at 18%, without imposing offsetting tax increases. Congress must pass permanent lower taxes for the over 70% of manufacturers that are S corporations and file as individuals like Marlin. Our health care costs also are constantly increasing, double digits year in, year out. We provide all of our employees with health insurance. The cost problem has not been solved by recent legislation. Congress needs to revisit these solutions that they proposed, and it's a problem, and it's holding us back. Our second goal is that the United States should be the best country in the world to innovate, performing the bulk of their company's global research and development. We want those R&D jobs here. The R&D tax credit is important to achieve this goal. Congress extended it recently. However, it's passed and expired more than a dozen times. A little more permanence and certainty in all tax policy would be a good thing. Finally, our last goal is the United States would be a great place to manufacture, both to meet the jobs of the American market and serve as an export platform for the world. This means more USA middle-class jobs. Manufacturers rely on overseas markets. 95% of the world's consumers are overseas, and most of our exports are manufactured goods. One of Marlin's main core niches is selling custom stainless steel material handling baskets to Japanese automakers. Matter of fact, this week we shipped to Mazda. Korean automakers have steadily increased their market share, offering a similar promising market. The U.S.-Korean free trade agreement, if enacted, will help Marlin Steel compete on a level playing field. I want to sell to Hyundai. I want to sell to Samsung. I want to sell to Kia. Rising energy costs also continue to hold back growth and job creation. Soaring oil prices have again stirred alarm.
Mr. Greenblatt, excuse me, we're down to 30 seconds.
Thank you. Even as the recovery takes hold, manufacturers temper our optimism with caution, whether it's the soaring price of oil or the administration's aggressive regulatory agenda. We believe the best way to ensure jobs continue and economic growth is to enact a strategy with comprehensive and consistent policies that allow manufacturers to compete in the global marketplace.
I thank the gentleman. And before we move on, we're going to do a highly technical fix to this. We're going to slide that clock down to the center, and that is our technological answer to it.
So I'm out of excuses.
But now the green light has disappeared on that one.
It's not going yet. I will be brief regardless.
All right. Well, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bono Mack and Ranking Member Butterfield, members of the committee. It's a privilege to be here today. You have my written statement. Let me briefly make 3 key points. The first is the obvious, that jobs are the central consideration at this point in time. The second is that we need to shift the policy focus from so-called stimulus efforts toward genuine pro-growth policies that will enhance the trend and growth rate of the U.S. economy and thus provide those workers with the jobs that they need. And then the third is some suggestions that such an agenda would begin with controlling spending to take off the table the looming sharp rise in the deficits and debt, tax reform that would make our nation the best place to headquarter a company and to enhance our international competitiveness. Third would be the jurisdiction of this committee in trade, enhance our engagement in opening markets abroad. And the fourth, a regulatory review to really temper the large-scale increase in regulation we've seen in a wide variety of policy areas in recent years. Jobs is obvious. Despite the recent news that we've seen this week, good ADP report, very good Institute for Supply Management report, this morning's report on lower UI claims, it still remains the case that with so many Americans out of work, it is far more likely that we see the unemployment rate rise before permanently declining than simply getting better on a sustained basis. So we have to keep a focus on this. Related to that, it is true that the economy is growing. It's been growing for 6 straight quarters. But that pace of growth, under 3%, is far too slow to sustain the kinds of job increases we need to get the 7 million workers who are out of work back into jobs and to provide for our children a standard of living that is better than the one that we've inherited. This is, in fact, typical of economies recovering from a financial crisis. We need to recognize that there will not be any quick fixes and instead focus on the kinds of policies that will allow us to grow more rapidly on a sustained basis and thus accelerate the possibilities even in the midst of a tough recovery. For such an agenda, I have lots in my written testimony. Here I want to just talk about two. First is the absolutely essential problem of taking on the projected debt in the United States. If one looks at any reasonable projection, either the administration's budgets or those by the Congressional Budget Office, one sees that over the next decade we face perilous times. Despite the fact that either such projection would actually count on a recovery to full employment, a fact that a financial crisis would be a distant memory, would presume that we are no longer fighting overseas operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that we would be raising well above historically typical levels of taxes, 19, 20% of GDP. Despite all of that, deficits are projected to be over $1 trillion 10 years from now. Something close to $900 billion of that will be interest on previous borrowing. In the interim, the United States will have crossed the technical line for downgrade as a sovereign borrower, and we will have debt-to-GDP ratios that are associated with the typical levels where financial crises occur. In short, we are on a path to disaster. The President's own fiscal commission described this as a national moment of truth, where we had to put aside political budgetary games and deferring of tough decisions to take on this problem. If you're a businessman trying to make a decision about the future, this is a recipe for either higher interest rates or higher taxes or both, and there can be no more pro-growth move by this Congress and this country than to take off the table those kinds of threats and allow businesses to make investments in their workers and in their technologies and plants in order to grow more rapidly. So I think that it's imperative that this be the top agenda item. The only way to do it is to control spending. This is not a revenue problem in all those projections. And I would deeply and professionally disagree with the kinds of reports that have been mentioned earlier in this hearing from either Mark Zandi, who was one of my assistants on the McCain campaign, for the record, and not a chief policy advisor, and Goldman Sachs. Those reports are fundamentally flawed in two ways. First, are technical. They make assumptions about the pace at which spending is cut down and the way it impacts the economy, which overstate their impact. And the second is just fundamental. There is no way in their analyses for forward-looking expectations to enter. There's no one in their analysis who's looking to next year or even 10 years from now. They are fundamentally myopic analyses. Everyone in this room gets up every day and tries to see the future. Are we coming out of this recession? Can we see better times ahead? And they're doing their analysis on the assumption that no one looks past next week. They're deeply flawed and overstate the impacts. Last thing I want to close with is trade. The United States has given up its historic leadership in trade. It has been on the sidelines far too long with 3 pending trade agreements, some of which are crucial and irrational not to ratify. And this committee has the jurisdiction to push that agenda forward. I would encourage them to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Firms in the United States.
Excuse me, Mr. Would you please just pull the microphone? We can hear you clearly, but I guess the big TV audience cannot. Perhaps a little closer.
I got a green light here. Here we go.
Thank you.
Sounds better. So we just need to be very mindful about the impact of the Dodd-Frank Act. So let me move to some solutions. What can we do as the administration, the Congress, and the financial services industry to make sure there's no negative impact from the new financial rules? Let me start with the administration. President Obama should be commended for 2 recent actions, but his actions need to be expanded and applied to the financial services sector. First, ensure that the President's new Council on Jobs and Competitiveness, chaired by GE's Jeff Immelt, also focuses on the financial services industry, not just manufacturing and trade. Second, ensure that the President's new order on regulation, quote, promising economic growth, innovation, competitiveness, and job creation, close quotes, applies to the new Financial Stability Oversight Council and other financial regulators. Secretary of Treasury Geithner's, this should be his major responsibility under the new Dodd-Frank Act in his role as chair of the council. Let me turn to what Congress can do, and I want to pick up on some of the statements in your opening remarks, Madam Chairman. I think there's some immediate initiatives that can be taken. In the consulting world, we would call these quick wins. First, demand that an economic impact assessment be made for all the critical regulations and rules coming out of particularly Title I of the Dodd-Frank Act, which affects the largest, most systemically important institutions and has the biggest potential impact on our economy, as I lay out in Table 1 in my testimony on page 10. Second, legislate new requirements for full economic impact assessments for all future financial regulations. You could put this bill on the suspension calendar in the next 30 days and begin to have a good bipartisan initiative to get to the facts and the diagnostics that I think need to be on the record as the Dodd-Frank rolls forward. Third, analyze the full impact of the new, more stringent restrictions for financial activities and practices on economic growth as required by Dodd-Frank. This is the only time in Dodd-Frank that the words economic growth are used. You won't find words like innovation and jobs anywhere, particularly in the first title of Dodd-Frank. Fourth, ensure that the Oversight Council and the Office of Financial Research actually establish industry advisory councils, as the Dodd-Frank already permits, in order to have a more balanced dialogue between regulated firms and regulators. I think this will result in more balanced outcomes and be good. The Secretary of the Treasury already has that in his sights and on his timeline. He just needs to follow through and appoint those committees. Fifth, hold the Treasury Secretary strictly accountable in the annual Oversight Council report for the impact on economy and jobs. Title I uses the words efficiency and competitiveness, and that's the closest you're going to get in Dodd-Frank. Again, you won't find the words innovation and jobs, even though they may be implied. So that's close enough for government work from my perspective. Even better, you could go back and amend the Dodd-Frank Act to put the words innovation and jobs in there as part of his mandate to review going forward. Finally, Congress should review the regulatory burden of 187 separate regulatory reports going to 16 different agencies to make them more streamlined and useful in the spirit of the new GAO report on government inefficiency.
I know the light is again not working, but that is that concludes your time. Do you need to sum up with a sentence or two?
No, just think I had other remarks in there about what the financial services industry should be doing on its own and is starting to do. But thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wince-Smith, you're recognized for 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Thank you, Chairman Bono Mack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. The U.S. manufacturing sector is a key engine of innovation, wealth generation, job growth, and national security. America cannot retain its geopolitical leadership and economic vitality without
Excuse me once again. I'm sorry, but if you could pull the microphone closer.
Without a robust, vibrant, deep industrial base driven by the design and production of high-value goods coupled to high-value services. The Council on Competitiveness is celebrating its 25th anniversary year. We're a nonpartisan group of CEOs, university presidents, and labor leaders formed at the time when we were concerned about the trade and technology challenges with Japan. Our unique membership looks at the issues that impact the nation, not what's in the interest of any one sector or constituency. Recognizing the challenges facing American manufacturers in the global economy and the imperative for job creation and job retention, the Council formally launched the U.S. Manufacturing Competitiveness Initiative last year, building on our pioneering work on innovation capacity, energy security, and sustainability. We're very pleased that this initiative is led by one of our dynamic CEOs in America, Sam Malin, the chairman of John Deere.
Our end goal, which will be presented at a National Manufacturing Strategy Summit on December 8th, is to really give a comprehensive roadmap of what the government, the private sector, and broader constituencies in our society need to do to take us to what we call the third millennium manufacturing opportunity. Just yesterday, we took a first step in this journey with the announcement of a first-ever public-private partnership where 4 large American enterprises, Deere, Lockheed Martin, GE, and Procter & Gamble, are teaming to bring the power of modeling and simulation technology into the hands of our small and medium-sized manufacturers. And this is a public-private partnership sponsored with support from the Economic Development Administration, but with over $2 million in commitment from the private sector. Today, I really want to highlight Ignite 1.0, the voices of American CEOs on manufacturing competitiveness. This is the first of 4 reports we will be issuing this year, and I want to emphasize 4 points that have come from the voices of over 40 American CEOs. The first is that creative destruction of businesses and jobs is at the very core of competition. Policymakers have to stimulate new business creation and job creation by ensuring that we have the most vibrant and dynamic enabling conditions, the optimal capital cost structure, regulatory environment, and access to the markets of the future. Let us not forget, 95% of all consumers in the years ahead will live outside the United States. 2, global economic competition is not a zero-sum game. Our global trading partners, yes, they're our competitors, but they're also our partners. 3, freedom of movement is an essential driver of national competitiveness. Movement of capital, labor, scientists, engineers, and ideas is critical. No great nation looks inward. 4, manufacturing is much broader and diverse and has a higher multiplier on the economy than at any other previous time in history. It's an extended value system, and it goes beyond just the making of the thing. Our CEOs have conveyed an unwavering belief that the United States has the resources, the capabilities, and the will to be the most competitive manufacturing nation in the 21st century. While they've applauded recent agreements in the areas of tax policy and global trade, we have so much more to do. Let's not compete on the cost of capital or who has the best regulatory system. Let's level the playing field there and compete on ideas, talent, and the game-changing innovation in industries that will reshape our world. Thank you very much.
You still have 1 minute.
Well, let me just conclude by saying that if we don't take the leadership on manufacturing, the rest of the world will, and it's ours to lose.
Thank you. Dr. Boushey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
And again, I will give you a 1 minute signal of some sort.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman Bonomack and Ranking Member Butterfield, for inviting me here to testify today. My name is Heather Boushey, and I'm a senior economist with the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Until we fill the demand gap, we will have continued unemployment, which in turn will continue to drag down economic growth. Today's high unemployment was caused by the mismanagement of the economy in the 2000s, a financial sector only in service of its own profit rather than fostering productive investments, and a housing bubble, and we must address these root causes. The policies that will create jobs now are those that will make investments that not only boost employment in the short term, but lay the foundations for long-term economic growth. The private sector has been adding jobs every month for nearly a year now, and at a faster rate than in the 2000s economic recovery. Even with the success of the Recovery Act in boosting job growth, at this pace we will not reach 5% unemployment for many decades. And there is growing unemployment has stood at or above 9% for a record 21 months. And there is growing evidence that many workers may never find jobs at the level that they had prior to the Great Recession. Job losses have been widespread and not only concentrated in the sectors hardest hit by the bursting of the housing bubble. This directly contradicts the notion that the jobs crisis is a structural problem. The continuing slow pace of the jobs recovery stems from insufficient aggregate demand in the overall economy. Gross domestic product grew at an annual rate of 2.8% in the fourth quarter of 2010, the sixth quarter of positive growth in a row. Much of this was due to the Recovery Act and other policies aimed at addressing the fallout from the financial crisis. Yet our economy continues to have a gap between what it currently produces and what it would be producing if workers and the economy's productive assets were to be used at full employment. Investment is the key to creating jobs now and building the foundation for a high productivity future. Even though corporate America is flush with cash, investment is at its lowest level in more than 4 decades. Yet the cost of capital continues to be at lows not seen since the 1960s. Small businesses continue to point to a lack of customers, a lack of demand, as their single most important problem. The National Federation of Independent Businesses reports that regulations are not nearly as important as poor sales. In our economy, we need to spend at least $2.2 trillion over the next 5 years just to repair our crumbling infrastructure. This doesn't even include things like high-speed rail, mass transit, and renewable energy investments we need to free ourselves from foreign oil and address climate change. Infrastructure has been a traditionally bipartisan issue and one that hopefully this Congress can build a bridge across to address. I live here in the District of Columbia, and across the street from me, a small business opened up a couple of years ago, a restaurant. This small business owner has had to deal with not 1, not 2, but 3 water main breaks because of the aging infrastructure here in the District of Columbia. And each time that business owner has had to close shop and not see customers, costing them money. We should not repeat the mistakes of the Great Depression with austerity policies that will not create jobs. There's been much talk this morning about the recent report from Goldman Sachs that estimates that the House-passed federal bill will decrease economic growth. And I would like to note that this was, as reported by ABC News, these were estimates for their clients. These are people that are investing in America, and they're trying to tell them how the policies here in Washington are going to affect economic growth. And I think that we should take their estimates very seriously. At the same time, we have heard Mark Zandi estimate that these policies that were implemented in the budget passed by the House will lead to fewer jobs here in the United States, an estimate of 700,000 by the end of 2012. I want to note that the most important reason for the rise in the deficit was rising unemployment and falling incomes.
This is 1 minute warning. Is the light working?
Yes,
Sorry.
it is working. Thank you. Economists estimate that had Congress done nothing, the deficit would have ballooned to more than 2.5 times as large as it actually will. And let's remember, it was deregulation that brought us today's excruciatingly high unemployment. Last month, the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission clearly placed the blame for the crisis on the lack of oversight and regulation of the financial sector. As we move forward in terms of thinking about regulation, we need to make sure that it not only works for business, but that we don't end up right back here in a few years because we are not focused on making sure that business also works for America. Finally, we need to make sure that if our goal of our trade policies is job creation, then we need to evaluate whether or not these policies will indeed create jobs here in the United States and whether or not they will reduce our trade deficit and on net create jobs. Recent empirical research shows that local labor markets that have seen increased exposure to Chinese imports have had higher unemployment, lower labor force participation, and reduced wages. We need jobs now, and we need the kind of investments that will transform our economy and renew long-run prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Boushey. Mr. Resch, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Slides, please. Madam Chairwoman Bono Mack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I am testifying on behalf of our 1,000 member companies and the 100,000 American citizens employed by the solar industry. In the last 2 years, during one of the worst economic downturns in our nation's history, the solar industry has thrived, becoming the fastest growing industry in the energy sector and one of the fastest growing industries in any sector in the United States. In 2010, the solar industry grew at a rate of 67% and now employs over 100,000 Americans across all 50 states. From 2009 to 2010, we doubled employment in the U.S., creating almost 50,000 new jobs while most other industries were contracting. We are putting plumbers, electricians, and carpenters that lost their jobs due to the collapse of the housing industry back to work. We are building new factories and providing existing manufacturers with new, large customers. And we are providing opportunities for small businesses to reinvent themselves and become part of one of the most exciting changes to our economy to occur in a generation. As you can see by this chart, the U.S. solar industry is expanding at a consistent 50% annual growth rate over the last 4 years. Photovoltaic installations fully doubled in 2010 in the United States, while construction began on dozens of massive utility-scale solar power plants that will be completed over the next several years, employing thousands of Americans and bringing billions of dollars of economic investment to the southern half of the United States. Things are bright for solar today, but that will not last unless the right policies are adopted. The U.S. solar industry has created opportunities for over 100,000 Americans. Take, for example, Justin Cox, a technical support rep at Sungevity, a company that is expanding and will soon operate in 8 states.
Up until 2 years ago, Justin was a soldier. When he came back after serving in Iraq, he found a job in the solar industry and now applies the leadership and technical skills he gained in the Army to expand his company. The U.S. solar industry is welcoming back thousands of veterans like Justin with new opportunity, and these aren't just jobs, these are careers. The growth of the industry and the creation of jobs is evident in all of your districts and all of your states. For example, in Chairwoman Bono Mac's district, there's a 21-megawatt solar photovoltaic project near Blythe, California. This is one of the largest PV projects operating in the United States. The project developer and module supplier for the project is an American company that manufactures in the Midwest with over 1,000 American workers. Also in Blythe, a new 1,000-megawatt concentrating solar power plant, the Solar Trust of America Blythe, is under development. It will be the largest solar project in the world, producing enough clean energy to power 300,000 American homes. Unfortunately, the Blythe project has been placed at risk by provisions of H.R. 1, which eliminate the funding for the project's pending Department of Energy loan guarantee application. But solar's reach goes far beyond California. Unfortunately, Congressman Barton isn't here, but the next two slides show facilities in Texas. This is a massive polysilicon manufacturing plant in Pasadena, Texas, which provides feedstock material for the solar industry. And the next slide shows a state-of-the-art solar power plant in San Antonio, Texas. And in Clarksville, Tennessee, located in Representative Blackburn's district, Hemlock Semiconductor is building a $1.2 billion polysilicon manufacturing facility to supply the solar industry. This plant will employ up to 1,500 workers during construction and over 1,000 workers for permanent operations when completed at the end of this year. Also in Tennessee is Sharp Solar's panel factory, located just south of Representative Blackburn's district. The factory expanded in 2010 and now has over 500 employees. So how do we keep this kind of solar job growth going? To succeed, we need stable tax policies. We need tax policies such as the Section 1603 Treasury program to be continued and incentives for solar manufacturing to be restored. We also need policies that facilitate financing for clean energy technologies that cannot be obtained in the commercial marketplace. To support these industries, Congress should consider a variety of financing mechanisms, including the Clean Energy Development Administration. But what is most important today is for Congress to restore funding to the DOE Loan Guarantee Program. Unfortunately, measures such as the provisions in H.R. 1 continuing resolution that eliminate all funding for the pending renewable and other non-nuclear loan guarantee applications are a step in the wrong direction. In its current form, H.R. 1 would likely kill as many as 30 clean energy projects representing tens of billions of dollars of economic development. With that, it will kill jobs like Jim Amadeo's, who is in Illinois, a solar plant operator. SEER respectfully requests that in the CR negotiations with the Senate that the House reverse the cuts to the Section 1705 Loan Guarantee Program. In conclusion, SEIA, our 1,000 member companies and our workforce of 100,000 strong, is eager to work with Congress on important policy initiatives to continue to grow the solar industry and solar jobs. Once again, I deeply appreciate the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee, and I would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Resch. The chair will recognize herself for the first 5 minutes of questioning, and I'd like to begin with Ms. Wince-Smith. In your written testimony, you state that you call something the creative destruction of jobs and say it's at the very core of competition, and that policymakers should not try to restore jobs or industries that have become uncompetitive. Can you explain what you mean by creative destruction and provide examples?
Well, a very simplistic example is back at the turn of the century when there was an effort to keep the buggy business in place when we were moving to automobiles. So it's part of the whole technological innovation that goes throughout human history. So let's focus on the jobs and industries of the future, recognizing that there's going to be tremendous productivity gains coming from the intersections of biotech, nanotech, information technology, and not the jobs really that are more commoditized and really can be performed at a lower cost and more efficiency elsewhere.
In it, though, you say policymakers shouldn't try to restore those jobs, but can you sympathize or understand what members of Congress do go through when they see industries fleeing their districts for whatever reason? Can you speak to that a little bit further? Because it as a member of Congress, when this happens, it's very painful, but can you explain why you think it's still beneficial?
Absolutely. In fact, if you look at the textile industry, which is an industry where we led the world, in the 19th and 20th century, and there's tremendous opportunities to use modern technology to revitalize that industry. So rather than focus on competing with Pakistan on certain types of cloth, let's focus on the industry that's going to embed smart intelligence into the needs of the military in textiles. So I think what we really need to look at is how do we take these industries to the next level and have the skilled workforce to go with that as opposed to just the status quo.
So what you're saying is we're actually preventing the growth by sort of dumbing down technologies.
Absolutely.
So, and you testified that manufacturing today has a much higher multiplier in the economy than at any time in past history. Can you quantify that multiplier, and how does it compare in past times?
Yes, I can actually give you the data for the multiplier right now. And in terms of past, it's about $1.4 in output versus 58 cents for any other sector. That's a pretty, and we have, we'll submit that complete data set for you, but it's very, very significant. And also, it's beyond the traditional view of manufacturing. You have to look at the whole value system around that, including the services that support the manufacturing.
Thank you. Mr. Greenblatt, how do you, all right, today's Washington Post reports that the Maryland Governor, Martin O'Malley, wants to double the state's surcharge on electric bills as to pay for construction of offshore wind farms. Can you talk about how that would affect your competitiveness? And I certainly am a Californian. I would believe that that is going to increase your energy costs, and that's going to affect you in a big way. Can you talk about it?
It's not a good idea. We're in favor of having low energy. We should eliminate taxes for manufacturing on energy because we're creating jobs when we build in the state of Maryland. And when you make it harder for us to compete with Virginia or Pennsylvania or China or Mexico, we're going to lose jobs in our state. It's very short-sighted.
Thank you. Would you talk a little bit the free trade agreements? You specify that they would be very helpful. Can you go into that, why they would be helpful for you?
Because it'll give us almost 100 million new consumers we could shoot for, we could sell to. For example, Korea, Panama, Colombia have almost 100 million consumers. And we want to compete, we want to grow, we want to hire more people in Baltimore and export to Korea, for example. Right now, when I ship a wire basket to Korea, there's an 8% tax against me. Once the Korean trade agreement's approved and enacted by the Congress, that 8% will go away. So we'll be much more competitive, and we're going to hire more people in Baltimore that are unemployed now, so we can improve our economy.
Thank you. Mr. Resch, are you now or have you ever been a Californian?
No, but I've always wanted to be one.
Have you ever been to Blythe?
No, I have not yet.
You have not. Can you say, you talk about the loan guarantee program, but can you say that the solar projects in my district have never had regulatory impediments that have stopped the development? Have there been sort of cross policies that have intersected where y'all have found yourself slowing the growth, the development slowing down because of regulation?
Absolutely. Land access policies, siting and permitting policies. We face the same kinds of impediments that any large industrial facility would face in siting in America today.
Have you ever scratched your head about why the government does things the way they do?
Of course. And
I mean, you spent your time talking about the loan guarantee program, but it's my hope that we talk about regulations that are slowing down prosperity in our country. And if you can spend 10 seconds, or I'm over my time, so 5 seconds talking about the truth is regulation has impacted you as much as any loan guarantee program, correct? Yes or no is fine.
The answer is yes, and we have the ability to deploy very, very rapidly thousands of megawatts here in the United States, much faster than you'll see in clean coal, natural gas, or even new nukes. But without removing some of those regulatory impediments, we'll never see that happen.
The chair will recognize Mr. Butterfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Boushey, the Republican CR that was put forth a couple of weeks ago to fund the government through the end of this fiscal year takes what I call a whack and hack approach to spending cuts. The approach taken in the proposal put forth by the President is a bit more surgical and strategic, to say the least. In particular, the Republicans have proposed cuts of $8 billion from infrastructure, 5.5 from R&D, 5.1 from education, 26.7 billion in cuts to Pell Grants for low-income college students. The President, on the other hand, has proposed increases in these areas. These are also three areas that the manufacturers and the Competitive Council and all of us on this side seem to agree are key to our long-term economic competitiveness and stability. Dr. Boushey, if we follow the approach to federal spending cuts put forward by our friends on the Republican side, and the Republicans' promise of job growth through spending cuts fails to materialize, will these cuts do anything really to cut the deficit, in your opinion? And I've looked at your resume, and you have a very impressive background, and you're an economist. What is your opinion on this? Will it affect the deficit in any way?
Well, two comments. I mean, first of all, there's two sides of the deficit, right? There's revenue and there's spending. And one of the challenges of the Great Recession and where we are right now is that revenues are down because people don't have incomes, because we have nearly 14 million people out of work. Those people without incomes, without jobs, they don't pay, as mentioned, taxes, if any, and then that of course leads to a growing deficit. You also have more people who need services, who don't have jobs, and so they need more assistance. So yes, if the economy, if these measures that have been taken in this CR do not lead to economic growth, then certainly that will increase the deficit. But moreover, we're really sort of cutting off our nose to spite our face with this CR in that we need these investments in our long-term economic future. We need to be investing in education. We need to be investing in technologies. We need especially to be investing in infrastructure. I mean, much of our infrastructure in the United States is aging, it's frayed, and it just doesn't work. And so we need an infrastructure that supports all of the businesses in America so that they can compete.
So is the conclusion that if we make these massive cuts in spending, that it's not going to result in America's competitiveness being improved?
I am very afraid that it will reduce our competitiveness. And the Center for American Progress and the Economic Policy Institute just released a letter earlier this week signed by over 325 some odd economists, including a number of Nobel laureates, saying that this budget, that CR, will hurt our competitiveness because we do not make the investments that we need to make in America.
Dr. Boushey, while I'm with you, let me ask you this. In your testimony, you note that the Federal Reserve survey of senior loan officers shows that while banks are lending for mergers and acquisitions, which often leads to job losses, they are not lending for investment in plant and equipment that will create jobs and expand economic opportunities. Can you explain more about this?
Well, what, of course, we've seen, since the end of the financial crisis led to tightening credit conditions, and we've seen that across the board. We've seen that it continues to be the case for small businesses that they are facing tight credit conditions, and that is a part of the problem, especially for the small business owners who need those funds to make those investments.
Let me go to you, Mr. Resch, if I can. With the situation in the Middle East as it is, particularly in Libya, and gas prices are on the rise yet again. As of yesterday, gas prices had increased in each of the last 8 days by a total of 24 cents. The national average stood at 3.39 for a gallon of gas. Some are speculating that the price per gallon could hit $4 by the summer. Let's pray that that does not happen. Rising fuel prices can and will have a ripple effect across our fragile economy. This isn't a new or surprising development for anyone. We've long known that our dependence on foreign oil puts our economic security in the hands of others. Mr. Resch, what do you think we must do to spur demand in the U.S. for clean energy technologies?
Well, it's absolutely critical that we do so, and part of it is education, but just in the same way that we provide subsidies to the oil and gas and coal industries, we need to make sure that we are providing a level playing field for wind, solar, and other technologies. Unfortunately, our policies are on again, off again, 1 year, 2 year, where those industries enjoy permanency. So providing a stable regulatory and policy framework is absolutely critical. The investment's there. The infrastructure is built. We are going to see these industries continue to grow very, very rapidly as long as we provide stability for the business environment.
It's sad that we get to $4 a gallon gasoline before the American people really concentrate on the importance of renewable energy.
It is amazing.
Thank you for the work that you do. I yield back.
I think the gentleman chair recognizes Ms. Blackburn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Wince-Smith, I appreciate that you mentioned creative destruction, especially in the creative economy. As we look at technologies, the life cycle is so short, and I think it's important that we not try to prolong the life cycle of a product that the American people do not want. So thank you for mentioning that. Mr. Cummisky, I want to come to you very quickly. Georgia, is it a right-to-work state?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay, and that, I would assume, helps the Quick Start program?
It helps a lot of things in the
Okay.
state.
And then
Including Quick Start,
if
yes,
you
ma'am.
would submit for me the budget that you have for Quick Start and then the ratio on your return for investment. I would love to know that. It sounds like a great program. And sometimes we in Tennessee at your border get a little bit jealous of some of the work you are doing there. What I would also like to know from you, because of the work you all are doing in some of the high-tech industries, what are the 5 things that you hear from the companies that you're working with when they talk about the federal government and they say they need to get this, that, or the other off the book, and you can just submit those for the record, and we would appreciate knowing what those 5 things are. We need to drill down and get some of these onerous regulations off the books.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, for you, I appreciated that you talked about the households, businesses, governments, international partners, and the effect the budget has there. I would love to have from you kind of a checklist as you look at this committee and our goal being to energize domestic production and manufacturing, how we best do that. If you look at these 4 sectors, what your advice would be on 5 items that we could do that you see would serve us well.
I'd be happy to submit that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Wilson, I want to chat with you a minute because your group supported the Dodd-Frank or Frank-Dodd, whatever you want to call it, bill. And I got
Actually, Congressman, the Roundtable did not.
Oh, they did not.
No.
Okay. Well, I got to tell you, I hear from my bankers and small businesses out in the district as we're doing these listening sessions that this is horrific. They want this thing off the books because it impairs their ability to get credit, and they see it as a true impediment. So I would love to hear from you your thoughts on how that legislation has and will continue to affect small businesses. And even though we don't have jurisdiction over that piece of legislation, I think that it prohibits people moving to the next generation of technology, that Ms. Wince-Smith has individuals that want to innovate something or a company that wants to locate in Georgia. So can you give me about 30 seconds on that one?
Sure. I think one of the biggest concerns, as I try to make clear in my remarks, is that there's still a lot of uncertainty about what the rules of the road are going to be going forward. So on top of the crisis, on top of not knowing what your capital liquidity requirements are going to be going forward, and we may not know what those are going to be until the end of the year, given the current state of U.S. rulemaking, none of that helps establish the certainty. Nor do we know the full economic impact of what that's going to be. I happen to think that the 250 new rules coming out of Dodd-Frank are going to have a net negative effect on economic growth and job creation. I can't prove that to you today. That's the kind of thing where I think the economic impact assessments that I referenced in my testimony would be useful, that either this committee or the Financial Services Committee could request of the Treasury and other financial regulators, or my idea of putting it on a new legislative requirement that all new future financial rules have a true economic impact assessment to go with.
Basically like we did in the pledge with the $100 million impact. Mr. Cummisky, submit to me also how much you all have increased your exports in Georgia. I would be appreciative of knowing that, and give your governor my regards.
I will.
Mr. Resch, I'd love to come to you for just a second, please, sir. Your member companies, how many receive government subsidies?
There are just a few that have received any kind of form of grant to help develop technologies.
And you don't know how much those total?
I'd have to look it up, but it's a pretty small R&D program that exists in the solar industry.
Okay. How many of those businesses would be viable without those government grants?
Most of them would be. What they're trying to do is really advance the technology beyond where the state is today, to expand applications into military applications, portability, increase efficiency, drive down costs. So those programs are really designed to, kind of lift up the industry, similar to what you see R&D programs for other energy technologies like coal and
then in 2005 you testified before this committee that tax incentives were necessary to jumpstart the solar market, but that those incentives should decline over time. So do you still hold that position?
I think our industry needs this very stable platform in order to build upon. We have tax credits that exist through 2016. By 2016, we hope to be the lowest source of retail electricity. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Ms. Schakowsky for 5 minutes.
Well, following up on that, Mr. Resch, how viable do you think the oil and gas industry would be without the $40 billion in subsidies they get over 10 years.
I mean, I think the reality is we need all energy sources. We're dependent upon foreign sources of energy right now. I think we need to refocus on our domestic sources and look at technologies like solar and wind that can be manufactured here, that can be deployed on homes and on businesses and in utility scale applications.
But do you think we still need to subsidize, especially now that gas is at $100 a barrel once again? Do you think that they really need to be subsidized?
Well, certainly it doesn't make any sense to subsidize an industry that is as profitable as the oil and gas industry while not providing the kinds of support for emerging technologies that are actually creating jobs here in the United States. But when you look at the economics of oil and gas, there's no doubt there's opportunities to encourage drilling that probably do require some kinds of tax incentives. But ultimately what we want to do is make sure we support all of the energy technologies, because we're going to need more of it going forward, especially more of the clean energy technologies.
Thank you. I want to ask a question that I've been mulling over for quite a while right now. In the United States of America, the income inequality has been growing enormously over about the last 30 years, so that right now about the top 1% of earners control about 39% of the wealth, which is more than the bottom 90%. The top 0.001% of Americans, the very, very rich, have an average income of about $27 million, and the 90% have an average income of about $31,000. Seems to me that that is a problem not only for our economy but for our democracy as well, when we have that kind of income inequality. And I'm wondering if anybody wanted to comment on that. It seems like we're still going in the direction, rather than of high wage economy, toward a low wage economy. We still see, while the manufacturing is picking up, we still actually give some incentives for businesses to go overseas. Does anybody want to comment on this? Yeah, Ms. Wince-Smith, and then we'll go to Dr.
Well, we have a lot of data at the Council on Competitiveness over the years that really show the direct correlation between educational attainment and income levels over time, and you are correct about the growing inequality gap. But on the issue, you know, and so our whole education strategy shews to that. And of course, we spend more per child from K through 12 than any country in the world outside of Switzerland, and we're not getting the outcomes. So the whole issues around how we get the impact from the investment in education is huge going forward. And the other thing I would say on, you know, the issue of low wage and how that relates to manufacturing, even in countries such as China now, there's tremendous data that their wage structure is increasing as they become more productive, and that companies are not investing in China because of low wage. It's the skill of the workers, it's the overall capital cost structure, regulatory environment. So we have to look at all of these things as a system and really optimize what do we need to do to ensure we have the highest skilled workers and do the best high-value activity in this country.
Although it's also true that productivity has gone up even as average wages for the middle class has gone down. Dr. Boushey.
Certainly. I mean, you're right about that, Congresswoman, that, you know, as we've seen America become wealthier and we've seen workers in the United States become more and more productive, you've seen an increasing divergence between how much the average worker is getting of those productivity gains and or not. And that's been a trend that's been going on for the past 30 years. I think that, you know, one of the things that we've talked about on this, that many folks on this panel have talked about today, is understanding the economic impact of regulations and understanding the economic impact of what government is doing. And I think that what your question about inequality points us to is thinking not just what it means for profits, but what does this mean for the kinds of jobs that are being created, and not just for folks at the very, very top, but across the distribution. When we're talking about jobs in the United States, we have to remember that 6 in 10 workers who are in this economy don't have a college degree, and are we creating good jobs for them? And they are indeed good customers for many of the kinds of businesses and things that we've been talking about here on this panel.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for recognizing me. I I know we've had Mr. Zandi quoted for his proposal or his analysis, and also I believe he was the one that said that the Stimulus Act was a resounding success, which most people that defend the Stimulus Act say, well, it would have been worse if we hadn't have done it. But the president said it's going to create 3.5 million jobs and 8% unemployment. So if you're going to define something as a resounding success, you might want to say that at least you hit the goals that you put forward. And Mr. Holtz-Eakin, I know you're familiar with the Goldman Sachs study. You just want to comment on that since it's been quoted here today and why you think it's probably not the best analysis?
Well, I certainly think that the fundamental flaw with these analyses is that there is no conduit anywhere in them for someone to be worried about the future. They are entirely driven by the current cash flows, and so mechanically, if the federal government spends less, that cash flow goes down, they say the economy's smaller. There's no ability for the private sector to recognize that taxes aren't going to go up in the future, interest rates aren't going to explode, there's not going to be a financial crisis, so I'm going to make the investment, get offsetting impacts. That's the basic reason to be doing this. So the studies are rigged to be at odds with the basic motivation for the policy. And I think they shed no light on the potential effectiveness of them whatsoever, in the same way that they were very misleading about what would happen with the stimulus bill. We're in the middle of a recovery that is driven by destroyed balance sheets. Households' homes are worth a lot less than they used to be. Their pensions have been damaged. Governments have red ink as far as the eye can see. None of this is about the current cash flow. This is about the fact that the assets and liabilities don't line up in any deep way, but we've got the wrong analysis injected into that situation. You get bad policy advice.
Could I comment?
Yes.
I'd like to comment on that for a moment. When we think about economic growth, we often sort of, maybe it's sort of a black box. So let's sort of open that up for a second. When you look at our gross domestic product, there are 4 basic components. Consumption, which is about 70% of GDP, investment, government spending, and net exports. In the short term, and what these models that the Goldman Sachs folks put forward, what these models measure is the impact over the next couple of years of reducing one of those components in a significant way. So in a moment, when we already have so many individuals, consumers cutting back, we already see investment is at decades lows, right? So firms aren't investing because they don't see customers. People don't have any money, as Dr. Holtz-Eakin said, because of the unemployment and also the reduction in their balance sheets. The decline in spending from the federal government will reduce growth in our economy. Now, over the long term, of course, we need to be concerned about the taxes, the tax increases to pay for that. But in the short term, where we have high unemployment, that's what that model is showing you.
That's a fair. But I also want to say, I know, and anecdotally, a lot of businesses aren't investing because they're concerned about the regulatory environment and uneasiness that's coming forward too. I know that from personal experience from people that I know, and so those of us who are concerned understand there are investments that are going to yield in the future. We spend a lot of money on education. That's something I was driven by in the state legislature. When you look at what I think we're looking at, inflation that's coming, if we don't get control of our budget deficit by printing money, you say that inflation is going to come. Interest rates or pressure has to be there eventually. I know they're record low, but looking at what is, if you say investments in the long term, we are looking in the long term and not trying to be, somebody. You're not trying to cut your nose off to spite your face. What we're trying to do is how we're going to have a sustainable future and a sustainable budget, and if we don't do it now, then when? That's the question. Mr.
I just add one thing. These models are used by policymakers at times, and they can be useful. I've been in the White House twice at the Council of Economic Advisors. I used these models when I ran the Congressional Budget Office, but they're missing things that are central to the economic moment. They, for example, assume a stable regulatory environment. We have an avalanche of new regulations in Washington. Last year we had a record number of Federal Register pages, and this year we're going to see come online Dodd-Frank, 240 rulemakings, 20 times more than we've ever seen, the Affordable Care Act, an extraordinary regulatory expansion, the EPA, boiler rules, 5 other rulemakings in process. There's nothing in those models that recognizes what's happening to the business community in reality.
And manufacturing is a pathway to the middle class for so many people, and that's where we have to make sure we preserve that in the environment. I know you probably want to comment. I got 20 seconds.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, completely manufacturing is certainly vital to American workers. But 2 things. I mean, one on inflation. I mean, we're at a moment where we're not seeing a lot of pressure on the capacity here in the United States. We're not seeing pressure on employment. We're not seeing pressure on our productive capacity. It remains at about 76% of what we're
seeing record high commodity prices. They're moving.
That is true, but there is a lot
of other reasons for that. I understand.
There's true. And so that's actually, again, why economically it makes sense that this is a good time for government to invest, right? You got bridges that you need to invest in. Now's the time to do it. I'll stop there.
Chair recognizes Mr. Harper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, one of the things that we've noticed in my home state of Mississippi is that I haven't found any business or any industry yet that believes that they are under-regulated. And I guess what I'd like to ask, first of all, is if I could ask Commissioner Cummisky, in your state, what have you seen that has worked that you would say would be good for other states and for us to look at?
I go back to what I talked about those type of endeavors, but our trade. We put a lot of time and effort into our trade, and not with just large companies, but with small business, less than 20 employees, and opening up pathways to people all across the state through our trade offices and our offices both in Georgia and outside internationally, who really have done great success finding new markets for them. I'm going back to that. One thing that has worked is every time a free trade agreement is signed, we've seen exports to those new areas increase about 206%. So that is what's working right now, and that's one other area I think that I didn't get a chance to talk about because of time issues. But the trade and trying to find new markets and putting some energy and time into that has paid off exponentially for us right now.
For anyone on the panel, but as far as recommendations on changes in tax code, what would come to the top of your mind?
I want to echo the comments that were made in Mr. Greenblatt's opening remarks. Our corporate tax code is at odds with our ability to compete around the world. We are the last major economy that clings to a worldwide system of taxation. Everyone else has gone to taxing companies only on the basis of their activity in the jurisdiction, whether it's the U.S. or Brazil or Germany. We, as a result, are at a fundamental disadvantage in the way we structure our tax system, and our rate is way too high. Again, the President's Fiscal Commission said we should move toward an internationally competitive rate and a territorial system. Absolutely, positively, it is the top thing to do in the tax code.
And if you did that, in what time period would you expect to see a turnaround or an impact in this country if we made that change?
I think you should change. You should just cut the rate right now. Okay. We have to end up there anyway, so why wait? You'd get a boost in the near term, and you get sensible tax policy in the long run.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I think you also have to reduce the complexity. We are paying about $40,000 a year in accountants and companies to make sure that we pay the right amount of payroll tax, make sure we pay the right 401k. If we make any mistakes, any inadvertent boo-boos, we get very large fines, even if we're not meaning to do anything. So we spend over $40,000 a year. I'd much rather hire 2 unemployed Baltimore City steelworkers, get them working for me, rather than paying my accountant for this.
Great. Yes, ma'am.
I would just add and support what Dr. Holtz-Eakin has said. You know, we see all over the world other councils on competitiveness that are partners of ours actually making fun of the United States now because of our corporate tax structure. In fact, countries that in the Nordics, you know, are saying, how could you have the capital cost structure you have? And we have the data now. It's not so much that U.S. companies that are sitting on, what is it, $1.8 trillion, they're not investing in this country because they're not customers. It's because they're global enterprises and they're optimizing all over the world where they're going to do their high-value work. And so it's a very complex issue. Having a very onerous corporate tax structure with all the other things we know, the repatriate, it's really just a knife in the coffin now. And when Canada and Japan can move very quickly, why can't we?
Yield back.
The chair recognizes Mr. Pompeo for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Dr. Boushey, there's been some discussion about what we did with H.R. 1. I've heard lots of criticism from it. Do you think there's any connection between job growth and deficit spending and projected deficit spending?
Certainly. In the short run or in the long run?
Talking about jobs.
Yes. Okay. Then that's so. Right now in this economy, we continue to have an output gap. We had a crisis.
So how much bigger should ARA have been?
No,
ma'am. There's a question. You suggested that we don't have enough stimulus, so I'd like a number about how big you think the stimulus should have been
It's a
to solve the
composition-
problem in Kansas of unemployment
It's
today?
a compositional problem, and it was a numbers problem. So Christina Romer, then chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, argued for a stimulus that would have been over over $1 trillion. That would have provided a bigger bang for the buck. But the second issue is that when the House got a hold of the bill, when the Senate got a hold of the bill, they changed it and changed the composition of where spending went. If you want to make a big bang for your buck in terms of government spending at a time of massive recession and massive unemployment, you want to spend it on things that have the largest multipliers. And Ms. Wince-Smith has provided a nice sort of primer
I
on a
appreciate
multiplier
that.
effect.
I'd like to reclaim my time.
You don't want to be spending that on tax cuts. You want
Right,
to
so
be spending on
there's a
things that increase
compositional problem.
aftermarket
How much?
demand.
So we took $61 billion out of the FY 2011 budget, and you think we should have instead added how much money?
I think we should have retargeted on things that would increase investment and increase our spending on infrastructure.
Thank you. I've heard you offer no solutions for what we should
My
have
testimony
done.
has a number of solutions.
I appreciate that. Mr. Resch, you suggested we should have not visited tax credits associated with your industry. I don't know exactly what the dollars were that we removed. Tell me, if we put that back in the spending bucket, what you think we should take out.
It's specifically a loan guarantee program. It's actually not a tax program.
But it's got real costs.
It's $2.5 billion that were specifically removed in H.R. 1. And what we're looking at reducing is somewhere on the order of about $30 billion of economic investment that would drive, and somewhere on the order of 20 to 25,000 jobs throughout the United States. And that's just direct jobs in the manufacturing of these facilities. You have then all of the manufacturing plants in Michigan and all the rest that would support these facilities.
Okay. Mr. Greenblatt, we heard this morning from EDA that provide grants to various industries and businesses. Would your business rather try and chase a grant from the federal government or have consistently lower tax rates?
If we could have lower tax rates, if we could put it on a postcard, this is how much we made, this is what our percentage is, and this is how much the check is going to be for. I would love that. I think every business would be happy to give up any grants.
I think so too. I spent the last 15 years of my life in the manufacturing world until I became part of the problem 60 days ago. So I think that's right. I certainly know what would have helped my competitors too, not just me, be successful. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, you've talked about this deficit issue. I came to this because it's always tomorrow. So the folks from Center for American Progress and other groups always say we have to spend today and we'll do the savings part somewhere down the road. It sounds to me like you think today's the day.
Today is absolutely the day, and the evidence is from around the world. I mean, you don't have to do theoretical models. You don't have to do anything. Just go look at the evidence. Those countries who have had massive deficit problems, faced with financial crises, who needed to fix those and grow, our problem, did it by controlling spending, keeping taxes low, or even cutting it. That's the evidence around the globe. It's referenced in my testimony. We should simply copy success.
Great. Thank you. I yield back my time, Madam Chair.
I thank the gentleman and recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Resch, if I could ask you a question, please. When you were asked by someone in the back panel about subsidies, getting subsidies in the industry, you answered that by saying grants. And then you went on to say in an earlier remark you commented about how coal is a subsidized industry. And so I'm just curious if since I think we're supporting the idea of R&D, a robust R&D in energy, can you share with me, because I'm wondering if you're being critical of the coal industry, and I'm curious, are you saying outside of R&D that coal companies are getting grants? And if you are, I'd like to know, could you provide me a list of coal companies that are getting grants that are not for R&D?
There's a number of studies that look at the entire energy industry and compares what tax incentives and what types of programs support those industries. They may not be grants directly, but I'd be more than happy to. Absolutely.
I'm very curious to see what coal companies are getting grants.
They're not specifically grants.
Because you answered the question when you were asked about subsidies. You went immediately to grants. So I'm assuming you equate the two. So
and I was talking about R&D specifically. I was talking about individual companies that are receiving grants from DOE.
On coal company, I would appreciate it.
And tax credits,
If I could ask you a question. First, thank you for clarifying that gross misrepresentation from Goldman Sachs' economic model. I just wish the rest of the panel had stayed to hear that misrepresentation. But if we don't cut spending, if Congress doesn't cut spending, and we continue this economic growth that plods along at 1.5% or 2% increase, when will we ever get back to the historic norms of employment here in this country?
It would take a decade, and the good news scenario is one where it takes a decade, we get people back to full employment, but there's no real productivity growth, there's no real rise in standard of living, we leave to our children a damaged economy. That's the good news scenario. The bad news scenario is we experience something that makes 2008's financial crisis look like a minor ripple, and then have to pick up the pieces afterward. It is not an option. We simply have to change course. That's what the President's Financial Commission said. It's very simple.
So we have to cut.
Yeah. So it is the right thing to do, and it should not be posed as, oh, we have to control future growth and entitlements. Do you want to cut Social Security? No, it is, do you want to leave to our children impaired freedoms and prosperity, or do you want to get the federal spending under control? Those are our choices, our real choices.
Well, help me out on it, Dr. Holtz-Eakin. Why doesn't the other side understand that? Have they not had real life experiences? Is this something they've not been private sector employers? Why don't people get that? It's so fundamental.
I've spent my entire life in economic education. I've spent 10 years trying to teach policymakers different things, and I decline to answer.
Well, if you ever get it, I'd sure like to hear it. Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes Dr. Cassidy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm so rarely called doctor anymore. I appreciate the remembrance of times past. Mr. Goldblatt, man, hats off to you, buddy. Obviously, our problem with the unemployed right now is in the non-college educated man. That's really where our issues are. And as I look at it, the fields that have traditionally addressed that have been mining, manufacturing, and construction. In a sense, you use one to enable the other to do the other, if you will. If the President has said that he wants to convert our electrical grid to renewables, I think by 2035, 90% renewables. Now, looking at the subsidy of energy, I have here something based upon an EIA report from the Wall Street Journal. Effectively, wind gets a subsidy of $6.44 million per BTU produced. Oil and gas, $1.9 billion, or about basically 300,000 per BTU of energy produced. So if to go to a green economy with a green energy source, so to speak, was going to triple your energy cost by 3%. I mean, by 3 times. What would that do to your ability to compete with other countries?
It's very bad for our energy costs to go up. And if you make artificial costs that drive up what it takes to make something in America, you're going to hurt our jobs.
So
we're going to have increased unemployment.
I've heard Chairman Barton say that the road to recovery goes through energy. So if your energy is inexpensive, that is a competitive advantage relative to other countries.
I agree. And not only that, these are great jobs, $70,000 a year jobs.
That's what I next wanted to say. It's my understanding and my experience in the oil and gas mining industry. Those are good jobs with good benefits that allow people to send their kids to college, et cetera. That's yours in manufacturing as well, I gather.
Absolutely. Remember, we have so many disadvantages. In China, they pay 30 cents an hour. In Mexico, they pay $3 an hour. We pay 20-something bucks an hour.
So if the cost of your energy is increased by the EPA regulating CO2 emissions, same effect, correct?
Absolutely. Any more artificial ways to drive up our costs are not going to help grow jobs in America. We want to grow jobs in America. You got to lower the barriers so we can compete more effectively.
So if we increase the cost of energy, lowering the number of jobs there, by the way, to increase the cost of manufacturing, lowering the jobs there, by the way, would that have an effect upon the ability of the construction industry to employ?
Absolutely, because when we have less factories or less needs for additions, you need less construction workers.
So if you will, if the answer to our problem of unemployment among the non-college educated man, good people, my dad was a non-college educated man, so is mining, manufacturing, and construction, policies which increase the cost of energy is a silver stake in the heart of each?
Our mission is to grow jobs.
Yes.
And when you increase our costs in America, we are not going to grow more jobs in America. You want to help us lower our costs. If you take off the shackles, we will beat China, we will beat Mexico, we will grow, and we will get us out of the recession.
Now, Mr. Resch, I know you're just over there biting your tongue. I can appreciate that, but let me ask you. If we equalize the subsidies that went between oil and gas and, say, your industry, but made those subsidies permanent, so I think I see that currently federal subsidies per megawatt hour for wind are $23 per megawatt hour, solar $24, and for coal is 44 cents. Now, the coal is permanent and yours is not. But if we said, listen, it's permanent in perpetuity, but it's 44 cents, would you accept that bargain?
I was smiling before because you sound like a lawyer, not a doctor.
Oh, man.
But sorry about that. I don't mean to offend you.
Meet you afterwards.
I think what you really need to look at is stability over time periods. And the oil and gas industry has enjoyed...
So if I give you 44 cents per megawatt hour...
Since 1916,
so that's been
coal
roughly
since
100
the 30s,
years.
nukes since the 50s.
So for 100 years, if you get 44 cents an hour, will you accept that? As opposed to what you're getting now?
We'll be subsidy free by 2020. Our goal as a technology is to drive down costs and to be and to drive down regulations.
So quick question.
We can be installed on every house in America.
If to balance the budget, we began to phase down those, so by 23, the subsidies are completely gone. Would you accept that?
If you do that for all technologies, absolutely.
So we went from 44 cents to zero, and from you from 23 to zero, you would accept that?
We would do it, but again, you need enough stability to build up the manufacturing base over the next 6 years. Because remember, coal, nukes, and oil have enjoyed almost 70 years of subsidies. We've enjoyed just 3 years.
That's subsidies for 20 years, at which point does it become stability? I yield back. I'm sorry. I know I'm out of time. I apologize.
I thank the gentleman and would like to thank our panelists very much. I believe we've recognized all colleagues. I want to say that I think it's been a very, very informative hearing. It's been a good hearing. I want to thank my colleagues and certainly thank the ranking member for his indulgence today and his help. I would like to remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I'd like to ask the witnesses to please respond promptly to any questions that they receive. So without objection, the chair is also going to insert 2 additional statements for the record, and we've previously shared these with the minority and believe that they will improve the hearing record. Without objection, so ordered. So again, this concludes the hearing. Thank you all very much for your time.